Hello everyone, I am the Creep's Cabin. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. When I was 12, I spent nearly every day of summer with my best friend riding bikes around our small town in Wisconsin. It was one of those towns where you knew everyone by name, where the gas station also sold bait, and where nothing ever really happened. We lived for the long, warm days that seemed to stretch forever, with nothing to do and all the time in the world to do it. We weren't bad kids exactly, just curious and restless, always looking for something fun, something different, something that felt like an adventure. That summer, we had memorized every alley, shortcut, and back trail around town. We had been chased off private property, climbed onto the roofs of old buildings, jumped our bikes off anything that looked remotely like a ramp, and once even tried to build a raft to float down the creek. It sank in less than a minute, but it was still a good day. It was one of those late mornings when the air was thick, and the sun was already making the pavement hot enough to sizzle that my friend told me about the warehouse. He said it had belonged to a dollar store chain that had gone under the previous winter, and the building had been sitting there ever since, forgotten, dusty, and packed full of leftover merchandise. Apparently, someone his older cousin knew had broken in before and found aisles and aisles of unopened boxes filled with all the junk those stores used to sell. My friend was electric with the idea. His eyes were wide, his hands flying in the air as he talked about it. He said he'd found a way in through a small window in the back, and if we were careful, no one would ever know we were there. I was nervous, but I didn't want to seem scared. We'd snuck into places before, like the old grain elevator or the half-collapsed barn outside of town, but this felt different. This wasn't just an empty building. It belonged to someone. It still had stuff inside, but I nodded and said I was in. Part of me was excited. The other part, the part one didn't really want to admit existed, had a weird feeling in my gut I couldn't shake. We packed our backpacks with snacks and extra water bottles and rode across town. The warehouse was on the edge of an industrial area, tucked behind a chain-link fence that had mostly rusted through in places. There were weeds tall enough to hide an entire bike growing up around the sides of the building, and the windows were thick with dust. It looked like no one had been there in years. We ditched our bikes in the weeds and made our way around the back, pushing through thistles and broken pallets. The window he'd talked about was there, just like he said, small, cracked, and with the latch already broken. It took a little work to pull ourselves up, and when I slipped and scraped my shin on the windowsill, I had to clench my teeth to stop from yelping. We dropped down inside onto a pile of flattened cardboard, and suddenly we were in. The air smelled stale, like old plastic and mildew. It was dim inside, with only a few beams of sunlight cutting through the grime-covered windows. Dust floated in the air, and the floor creaked under our sneakers. We were in a narrow hallway that opened into a bigger room lined with tall metal shelves. Most of the boxes were sealed, but a few had been opened, their contents spilling out: plastic toys, cheap kitchen gadgets, stuffed animals with their tags still on. We wandered through the aisles, laughing in low whispers, pulling things out of boxes and tossing them into our backpacks. It was like some kind of forgotten treasure trove for kids with too much time on their hands. My friend found a handful of fake gold rings and shoved them onto every finger. I grabbed as much candy as I could carry, including an entire case of Laffy Taffy with little colored sprinkles embedded in the sides. We found rubber snakes, fake mustaches, packs of playing cards, even some knockoff action figures that looked vaguely like superheroes, but with strange misspelled names. It was dumb and fun, and felt like the coolest thing we'd ever done. We'd been in there maybe 10 minutes, maybe less, when we heard it. The metal door on the far side of the warehouse creaked open. It wasn't loud, but in the stillness of the place, it sounded like thunder. We froze. My heart shot up into my throat and started pounding so hard I thought whoever had come in might hear it. We dropped everything and ducked behind a stack of boxes. My friend looked at me, wide-eyed, and then nodded toward a small side room nearby. A storage area, maybe, or a break room. We bolted for it, careful not to let our shoes squeak or crunch over the debris on the floor. Inside the room, there were more boxes, some half unpacked, some stacked almost to the ceiling. He slipped behind the door and motioned for me to do the same, but there wasn't enough room. It was too tight. We were both breathing hard now, trying to be quiet, listening. I spotted a little closet off to the side. The door was missing, and it was barely big enough for one person, but it was my only option. I ducked into the closet and crouched as low as I could, trying to press myself into the shadows. There were cleaning supplies in there, a broken broom, a cracked plastic bucket, a dried-out mop that smelled like mildew and old soap. The closet walls were lined with chipped white paint, and cobwebs clung to the corners. I was exposed. Anyone who even glanced that direction would see me instantly. I tried to slow my breathing, tried to become invisible. I could hear footsteps coming closer now. Heavy ones. More than one set. My hands were shaking. I wrapped my arms around my knees and stared at the doorway, praying no one would come in. They did. 2 men walked into the room, their voices low and angry. One of them dropped something heavy onto a nearby table, and the sound made me flinch. They started going through the boxes, pulling things out, muttering to each other about inventory, about someone breaking in the week before. One of them swore loudly and said if he ever caught the punks who were messing with the place, he was going to beat the hell out of them. My stomach twisted into a knot. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. I was sure they were going to hear my heartbeat. Every breath felt like it echoed. I stayed completely still, eyes fixed on the edge of the doorway, barely daring to breathe. The room filled with the sound of boxes being dragged, tape being ripped, things being tossed onto the floor. At one point, one of them came close enough that I could see his boots stop just a few feet from where I was crouched. He stood there for what felt like hours, then turned and walked away again. They kept talking, arguing about whether the locks needed to be changed, whether they should install cameras. One of them said the cops didn't give a damn, and it was up to them to protect the place. 10 minutes, maybe longer. That's how long they stayed in the room. Every second was pure fear. I thought about my parents, about how they thought I was just out riding bikes. I thought about how dumb this all was, how it was supposed to be fun, just another summer adventure. I wondered if my friend was okay, if he was still behind the door, if he could see me. I didn't move, not an inch. Eventually, the voices started to fade. I heard the door creak again, and then nothing. I waited. We both did. We waited so long that my legs started to cramp and my back ached from crouching. But I didn't care. I wasn't going to risk it. Finally, after what felt like forever, my friend slowly stepped out from behind the door and looked around. I crawled out of the closet, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. Neither of us said anything. We didn't have to. We crept out of that room like ghosts, moving so slow and so quiet it was like we were part of the building itself. We didn't go back the way we came. The main door was probably locked, but we didn't care. We found another window in the back that looked loose enough and managed to wedge it open with a piece of scrap wood. I scraped my arm climbing out and tore the leg of my shorts, but I didn't stop. We hit the ground running and didn't look back. We crashed through the weeds and jumped on our bikes and pedaled as fast as we could until the warehouse was just a blur in the distance. When we finally slowed down, we were near the river that cut through the edge of town. We threw ourselves onto the grass and just lay there, catching our breath. I couldn't believe we'd gotten out. I felt sick and shaky and wired all at the same time. My friend pulled off his backpack and opened it. Most of the stuff inside was junk, but he held up a handful of the fake gold rings like they were treasure. I dug into mine and found the case of Laffy Taffy. I ripped one open with hands that were still trembling and popped it into my mouth. It was the kind with the sprinkles. It tasted amazing. We didn't talk about what happened. Not really. Later that week, we joked about it like it was no big deal, but neither of us ever suggested going back. We stuck to the woods, to the creek, to abandoned barns and half-forgotten trails. I never broke into a building again. Not once. The rush wasn't worth the fear. I don't even know who those guys were, owners maybe, or just guys hired to keep watch over the place. All I know is they were serious. If they'd found us, it wouldn't have been some movie-style escape or harmless scare. They meant it when they said they'd beat someone. I could hear it in their voices. Looking back, I still remember the smell of that closet, the way the dust hung in the air, the feeling of cold fear in my gut, like a rock just sitting there. I remember the way my friend looked at me after we got out, pale, sweaty, eyes wide. We'd been lucky. Stupid, but lucky. That warehouse probably got cleaned out eventually. Maybe it was sold or torn down or turned into something else. I haven't been back. But every time I see a pack of Laffy Taffy with sprinkles, it all comes back in a rush. The sun on the pavement, the creak of the door, the silent, breathless wait in that little closet. The first and last time I ever let curiosity get the better of common sense. And still, somehow, that candy never tasted sweeter. I was always the type to enjoy being alone in nature. A solo hike in the mountains had become a routine for me, something I did to clear my mind. That day, I decided to take a different route, one I hadn't explored before. The morning was crisp, the kind of morning where the cold air hits your lungs but doesn't make you feel suffocated. The sun was barely above the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor. I grabbed my backpack, packed some water, snacks, and a first aid kit, just in case. Nothing too extreme, just a day trip to clear my head. I wasn't worried. I had hiked this area many times, even though I hadn't gone down this particular trail. It was marked on the map, and I had done my research, nothing too difficult. The trail looked well-worn, signs of foot traffic visible in the worn dirt. I checked my phone for reception, no bars as usual. I didn't mind. I liked being disconnected. It made the hike feel real, like I was truly alone with nature. The air had that clean, earthy smell to it. The forest was quiet except for the occasional rustling of leaves under the feet of squirrels or the chirping of birds in the trees above. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet you only get when you're deep in the woods. I walked for a few hours, just listening to the forest around me. I felt like I was in my own world, just me and the trees. But after a while, things began to feel off. It wasn't anything obvious at first. A small twig snapped underfoot, and I glanced around, noticing how silent everything had become. The birds had stopped chirping, the wind had died down, and the usual hum of insects seemed to vanish. I shrugged it off, assuming it was just my imagination. It wasn't unusual for the forest to fall silent like this from time to time. Animals get spooked, and suddenly the forest is still. But then I saw something in the distance, a shadow. At first I thought it was a deer, but as I got closer, I realized it was much too tall for that. It was standing between two trees, almost perfectly still, blending into the forest. The figure was shaped like a person, but something about it seemed wrong. It was too tall, too thin, its limbs stretching unnaturally long in a way that didn't look like anything human. I froze, instinctively backing away a few steps. My heart began to race. I didn't know why I felt so uneasy. It was probably just a trick of the light, maybe someone else out here, but the way it was standing made me feel like I wasn't supposed to be there, like I had wandered into something I shouldn't have. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the tension. When I looked again, the figure was gone. There wasn't even a trace that it had ever been there. I glanced around for a moment, wondering if I had imagined it, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was like the forest had closed in around me, the trees now towering and imposing rather than comforting. I continued walking, my pace quickening, trying to put some distance between myself and that strange moment. The quiet was beginning to feel heavier, the silence pressing in around me. My mind was racing now, thinking about what I had seen, or thought I had seen. I looked around at the trees, the trail, the ground beneath my feet, but nothing seemed out of place. Still, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, my senses alert, straining against the stillness. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I came to a clearing. The sunlight broke through the canopy here, casting long rays across the ground. In the middle of the clearing was a large boulder, and beside it, something else caught my eye, a strange shape. It was a piece of fabric, something red, tangled in the branches of a bush. Curiosity got the best of me, and I stepped closer. As I drew near, I saw what it really was. It wasn't just fabric, it was a jacket, a thick, red one, covered in dirt and fraying at the edges. I knelt down beside it, a sudden unease growing in my chest. There was something wrong about it, something that didn't fit. It wasn't the sort of jacket someone would wear out here for a hike. It was too clean, too new looking, as if it had been dropped there recently. The ground around it didn't show any signs of foot traffic. It was like someone had just abandoned it. I stood up quickly, my eyes scanning the area. The feeling of being watched was now overwhelming, like every tree and rock was somehow aware of my presence. I turned around, looking back the way I had come, my heart beating faster. I had to leave. This was too much. I knew it was probably nothing, but the unease settled deeper, the feeling in my gut telling me to turn around. Just as I was about to head back, I heard a noise behind me, heavy breathing. It was faint at first, barely audible, but it was unmistakable. I froze. The breath was ragged, almost like someone who had been running, but there were no other signs of movement. No footsteps, no rustling in the brush. Just the sound of breathing. I turned slowly, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. But there was nothing. The clearing was empty, the trees still and unmoving. The breathing stopped. I stood there, my breath caught in my throat, feeling like I was at the center of something strange and unnerving. I took a few hesitant steps back toward the trail, my eyes scanning the area around me. Every shadow seemed darker now, every rustle in the trees louder. Then, without warning, I heard it again. This time, it was closer, just behind me. I whipped around, my heart hammering in my chest. There was no one there. The clearing was as still as it had been before. But something was wrong. I could feel it now, a presence, like someone was standing just out of sight, watching me. I couldn't stay here any longer. My legs were trembling as I started to back away slowly, my eyes darting around, every muscle tense. I didn't know if I was just being paranoid or if something was truly out there, but I didn't care. I just needed to leave. I moved quickly now, my steps unsteady as I jogged back toward the trail. The silence was oppressive, and every sound seemed amplified. I heard the rustling of leaves behind me, the snap of a twig, but when I turned around, there was nothing. It was as if whatever had been there was following me, keeping its distance, but never letting me go. I pushed forward, my breath coming faster now, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had seen. The figure in the woods, the jacket, the breathing. I wanted to get back to the car, get out of the woods, and never come back. I had no idea what was out there, but it wasn't friendly. It wasn't natural. I could feel it, deep in my bones. As I approached the spot where I thought the trail should start to curve back, I noticed something even stranger. The path seemed different. It wasn't the same as I remembered it. There were new tracks on the ground, fresh ones, too fresh to be mine. They were large, deep impressions in the dirt, as though someone or something had been walking here recently. The footprints were wide, the edges soft, as if made by boots that had recently stepped on the ground. I froze again, my mind racing. Had someone been following me? I didn't know what to think. The tracks seemed to lead off to the side, veering off from the main trail. I had no intention of following them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, something just out of reach. I started to walk faster, the trail now seeming to stretch on endlessly. Every snap of a twig, every rustling leaf, made me jump. But there was nothing. Nothing except the overwhelming sense of being pursued. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw the first signs of civilization, a sign marking the edge of the forest. Relief flooded me, but it didn't last long. The last stretch of trail was open, wide, and the trees were thinning out. I could see my car in the distance, parked near a small clearing at the edge of the woods. But as I stepped into the open, I heard something one last time. The breathing, close and steady, just behind me. I couldn't help myself. I turned around, ready to face whatever it was, but there was nothing there. Just the empty woods and the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. I didn't waste any time. I sprinted the last stretch, heart racing, hands shaking, and I jumped into the car, slamming the door shut. I didn't even look back. I just started the engine and drove. I didn't care about anything else. I just needed to get away. The road out of the forest seemed endless, my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, half expecting something to appear. But it never did. I made it out. And once I was back on familiar ground, the tension slowly started to ease. That night, I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure again, standing in the trees, watching me. But I knew one thing for sure. I was never going back to that trail. Whatever had been there, whatever I had encountered, was not something I wanted to face again. The woods may have been beautiful, but some places are better left unexplored. It was one of those crisp winter days where the air bit at your skin, making your breath come out in white clouds. I was 5 years old at the time, so everything felt big and distant. My grandpa's house stood on a property that seemed to stretch for miles. It wasn't like the other houses I'd been to. There were no neighbors in sight. Instead, there was nothing but trees, big, dark, dense trees that formed what felt like an endless forest. We were used to it. Me, my brother, and my cousin would play outside for hours, running between the trees and jumping over snowdrifts, lost in our own world. But that day was different. There was something about the air that made everything seem a little more serious, even though I couldn't have said why. Maybe it was the cold, or maybe it was just that winter had always felt so much harsher there, up in the hills. My brother was 7, older and wiser than me, and he was always the one who thought things through, always the one to tell me what to do or how to do it. My cousin, who was 6, was the wild one of the group, always laughing and running ahead, daring us to follow her. We were outside, dressed in our thick winter jackets, snow pants, boots, hats, and gloves, ready for the kind of adventure only kids could truly appreciate. The pond had frozen over that winter, and it looked like a giant mirror stretching out from the forest. I'd never seen anything like it before. It was smooth and glistening, like something out of a storybook, but real. We decided to walk out onto the ice, the 3 of us together, slipping and sliding over the frozen surface. It felt strange underfoot, solid but a little shaky, like something that could break at any moment. I remember my brother, always cautious, always thinking ahead. He said we should spread out, make sure our weight was distributed evenly across the ice. He didn't want to risk cracking it too soon, though I didn't understand why at the time. To me, it just seemed like we were walking on a giant frozen sheet. What could go wrong? We did as he said and spread out, each of us walking a few feet apart, slowly making our way toward the middle of the pond. The cold bit at my cheeks, and I could feel the ice beneath me groaning, as if it were alive and stretching. My cousin was ahead of us, laughing and skipping over the ice, not really paying attention. My brother walked carefully, testing each step. And I was just following, happy to be out there with them. Then, without warning, the ice cracked. It wasn't loud at first, just a faint, eerie cracking sound that sent a chill up my spine. I remember looking down in confusion, seeing the lines running through the ice like veins, spreading out from where I stood. The ground beneath me shifted, and before I could react, the ice gave way completely. It felt like falling forever. My heart pounded in my chest as I plunged into the freezing water below. The shock of it was immediate. The cold wasn't like anything I'd felt before. It hit my skin like knives, icy tendrils crawling up my arms and legs, freezing me to the core. I gasped, but all that came out was a choked sob, my breath stealing away in the frigid air. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't see anything clearly. The water was too dark, the ice above me too thick. Panic surged through me as I flailed, trying to push myself to the surface. But the water was so cold, so deep, and my arms and legs felt like they were made of stone. I could barely move, every part of me heavy with cold. I heard my brother's voice, distant, muffled by the water, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. My cousin was nearby too, but I couldn't tell where. All I could focus on was the sharp sting of the cold, the feeling of being swallowed whole by the ice. I don't know how long we were in that water. Time blurred, and I lost all sense of it. I remember gasping for air, feeling the cold burn my lungs as I tried to keep my head above the water. My arms were numb, and my body was shaking uncontrollably. The world felt like it was shrinking, like the only thing that mattered was getting out of that water before it swallowed me whole. Then somehow my brother was there. His hand shot out of nowhere, grabbing me and pulling me up with strength that I couldn't understand, considering how small and frail he seemed to me at the time. But he pulled me up to the ice again, and I scrambled, desperate to get out. The ice was slick beneath me, but somehow, through the panic, I managed to crawl my way back up, my legs trembling, my heart pounding in my ears. We didn't stop to look around. We just ran. My brother grabbed my hand, and together we sprinted, slipping on the ice but never stopping, never looking back. I don't know why we left our cousin behind. We should have helped her, should have turned around to make sure she was okay. But we didn't. I couldn't think straight, not in that moment. The cold was too much, and the fear of what might happen next clouded everything else. We ran and ran, up a giant hill of snow that seemed impossible to climb. Every step was a struggle, the snow deep and soft underfoot, pulling at my legs, making it harder to move. The cold gnawed at my skin, freezing my breath as it came out in shuddering bursts. I remember the wind cutting through my jacket, seeping into my bones, and every step felt like a mile. It felt like hours, though I know it couldn't have been more than 10 minutes before we finally reached the house. My brother and I stumbled inside, the door slamming behind us as we collapsed onto the floor. I could barely feel my fingers, my toes, my entire body a frozen block of ice. My brother was shaking too, his face pale, his lips blue. But at least we were inside. I don't remember what happened to our cousin. I was too cold to think about anything except the numbness creeping into my limbs. I don't know how long we sat there, our teeth chattering, our bodies shivering uncontrollably. I just remember the heat of the house slowly sinking into my bones, and the sound of my brother's voice, barely a whisper as he asked if I was okay. We were okay, but it didn't feel like it at the time. We'd almost died out there, frozen in that pond, and I couldn't get the image of the ice cracking out of my head. Later, my grandpa found out what had happened, and he went out to check on my cousin. I think she was all right in the end, though I never really knew what happened to her after that. Maybe she was okay, maybe she wasn't. We never really talked about it, not then and not after. But I'll never forget that cold. The way the ice cracked beneath my feet, the way the water swallowed me whole, and the way everything seemed to go silent for just a moment before the panic set in. It was the kind of cold that changes you, the kind that makes you appreciate warmth in a way you never did before. We didn't go out onto the ice again that winter, and every time I look back on it, I still feel that chill deep inside me, that bone-crushing cold. But I learned something that day. I learned how fragile everything is, how quickly things can go wrong, and how important it is to trust the people around you, especially when you're scared. Because we made it back, all of us, even if we didn't stop to make sure everyone was okay. And that's something I'll never forget. I woke up to the sound of my mom's sharp breath, a quiet gasp in the stillness of the night. The kind of sound you make when something's wrong, but you don't know exactly what. I had been asleep, wrapped in my sleeping bag, the cool, coastal breeze rustling the tent fabric, and the quiet of the campsite keeping me in a peaceful slumber. It had been a long day of travel and setting up camp, but I wasn't so tired that I couldn't immediately sense something wasn't right when I heard that sound. I opened my eyes, the dim light from the moon outside, just barely enough to make out the outlines of the tent. My mom was sitting up, her back rigid, her body tense in a way I'd never seen before. I could hear the sound of her breath, shallow and quick, like she was trying to stay calm, but the fear was palpable. My mom wasn't the kind of person to get rattled. She was the type who loved the outdoors, who'd take me on weekend hikes, who set up camp with ease, who knew how to start a fire without matches and could probably survive in the wilderness longer than most people. But now, she wasn't just tense. She was alert, like she was waiting for something. I could tell she wasn't sleeping, but I didn't know why. I opened my mouth to ask what was going on, but before I could even form the words, she shot her hand over my mouth, the fingers cool and firm against my skin. She didn't speak, but I could feel the urgency in the way she was holding me still, her eyes wide and darting to the edges of the tent. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, slow, purposeful footsteps, coming from just outside the tent, just a few feet away. Not the soft shuffle of animals moving through the brush, not the rustle of the wind in the trees. No, these were human footsteps, deliberate, slow, and they were right there, next to us. I could hear the faint sound of leaves crunching under boots, the distinct rhythm of something walking in our direction. The kind of steps that make the hair on your neck stand up and your heart race. I held my breath, my mind racing, and that's when I noticed something else. The flap of the tent door, the little cover that shields the zipper from the wind and rain, it was moving. The slightest twitch, but enough to know someone, or something, was right there on the other side, just inches away from us. I could feel my pulse quicken as the footsteps stopped, and the air seemed to hang heavier, thicker, in the space between us and whoever, or whatever, was outside. My mom was still motionless, her eyes locked on the tent flap, listening. Her hand was still over my mouth, and I could feel her tension as she waited, as if she were calculating the next move. It felt like hours, though I knew it was only seconds. Then my mom did something that I would never forget. Her voice was low but loud enough to be heard. Kenny grabbed the gun. My heart skipped. Kenny. But it was just us here. My dad wasn't with us. It was just me and my mom, alone in the wilderness. I knew what she meant. She wasn't talking to anyone real. She was talking to a figure in her mind. She was talking to something she thought she could handle. And it worked. The footsteps stopped. Everything stopped. There was a long, uncomfortable silence, thick and tense, like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for the next sound, the next move. I could feel my chest tightening, but I didn't dare make a sound. I stayed as still as possible, my body pressed flat against the ground beneath the sleeping bag, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear my mom's breathing, steadying, trying to remain calm in the face of whatever was out there. And then, finally, I heard something else. The footsteps started to retreat, slowly at first, then picking up speed, fading into the distance until there was nothing. Not a sound. Not a single thing to suggest whoever had been out there was still nearby. I waited for what felt like an eternity, trying to listen, trying to sense if there was still someone close by. But nothing. It was dead silent. My mom finally let out a long breath, her shoulders relaxing just a bit. She took her hand off my mouth, and I could see her eyes, wide but steady, as she finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Stay quiet. Don't make a sound. Stay low. We're going to wait this out." I didn't move, didn't say a word. I just stayed there, my mind racing, but my body frozen, obeying her command. For a few minutes, we both just lay there in silence, listening. Every little sound, every shift in the night felt like it was amplified, like the whole world was suddenly louder, sharper. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of waiting, my mom whispered again. "Okay, we're going to go out there now." Slowly. My heart skipped. What did she mean? But I knew better than to ask. My mom didn't make decisions lightly, especially not in situations like this. I could see her eyes, steady and calm, but I could also see the edge of something in them. Fear. But it wasn't the kind of fear that paralyzes you. It was the kind of fear that makes you ready for whatever comes next. We slowly unzipped the tent, inch by inch, the sound of the zipper cutting through the silence like a knife. We waited, listening. The night was still, eerily still. My mom poked her head out first, then motioned for me to follow. I crawled out of the tent, my bare feet hitting the cold ground as I glanced around. There was no one in sight. No truck. No sign of anyone or anything that shouldn't have been there. The campsite was as quiet as it had been hours before, but something in the air was different. The stillness wasn't peaceful anymore. It was tense, charged with the aftershock of whatever had just happened. My mom looked around the campsite, her gaze sweeping the area, making sure there was no sign of movement. She stayed close to me, her eyes scanning the surroundings, like a hawk on alert. "Let's get packed up," she said, her voice low but firm. Now, there was no hesitation. She didn't need to explain why. We didn't need to talk about it. Whatever had been out there, whoever had been out there, was gone, but that didn't mean it was safe. We both knew better than to stick around when something like that had happened. We didn't even bother trying to make sense of it. Why had they been out there? What had they wanted? It didn't matter. All we cared about was getting out of there, getting back to the car, and getting far away from whatever had just happened. We packed up in a hurry, the tent shoved into its bag with a little more force than usual, the sleeping bags hastily rolled up, and everything shoved into the car with a rush. It wasn't until we were on the road, driving down the winding, narrow path back toward the highway, that I finally let myself breathe again. The headlights of the car cut through the dark, illuminating the path in front of us, the trees on either side casting long shadows. We didn't talk much on the way down the hill, but every so often, I'd glance over at my mom, and I could tell she was thinking the same thing. We weren't going to stay in places like that again. Not without a plan, not without making sure we were safe. The campsite was quiet now. Too quiet. And that's what made it feel so wrong. The night had started like any other. It was one of those evenings where you just want to let off a little steam with your friends after a long week of university classes. The kind of casual hangout that didn't require anything more than a few drinks, some good conversation, and the usual laughter. But as the clock ticked later into the night, things took a strange turn, and I still don't fully understand what happened. It all started when we ran out of booze. It wasn't that big a deal at first. Sure, it was a bit of a buzzkill, but the real problem was that it was already well past midnight, and hardly any of the shops in the area were open at that hour. The only place that was still operating was a 24-hour supermarket a mile or so down the road. We had a choice. We could call it a night, head back to the dorms, and just deal with the disappointment, or we could make the trek to the supermarket. Being the kind of people we were, we opted for the latter. We figured, what was a little walk in the middle of the night? It wasn't like anything could go wrong. There were 3 of us, me and 2 of my friends, and as we stepped out onto the street, the cool air hit me, carrying the familiar scent of late-night city life. Damp concrete, a hint of exhaust, and the distant sounds of cars cruising by. The roads were quieter than usual, with only the occasional car speeding past us, and the streetlights illuminated everything with a soft, yellowish glow. The walk to the supermarket was uneventful at first, with us joking around and talking about the usual nonsense. But as we started to move further away from the main part of the city and into the more suburban areas, the mood began to shift. It was the kind of suburban area where every house looked the same, rows upon rows of identical two-story homes, all with neatly trimmed lawns and perfectly placed garden gnomes. The only thing that changed was the occasional car parked in a driveway or the position of the streetlight every few meters. It was one of those areas where the monotony could almost make you feel like you were walking through a weird, dreamlike version of reality. Nothing stood out. After a few minutes of walking in silence, one of my friends suddenly broke the stillness. "Hey, did you guys see that back there?" he asked, looking behind us with a frown. I glanced back over my shoulder, trying to follow his gaze, but I didn't see anything unusual. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Back there," he said again, but this time with a more serious tone. There was a fire, like a big campfire or something, and people were riding horses around it. It looked like some old-timey gathering, like something out of a Western movie. I thought it was weird. His comment caught me off guard. I hadn't seen anything like that. We had passed some fields earlier, but I hadn't noticed any campfires or people riding horses. Maybe he was just messing around, or maybe I had been too distracted by the walk. But as we continued to walk, the image of a large fire, people riding horses, and the strange, almost nostalgic atmosphere he described lingered in the back of my mind. My other friend, who had been silent up to that point, spoke up, almost as if she had been thinking the same thing. "Yeah, I noticed it too," she said. "It seemed out of place, like something from another time. Why would anyone be out there at this hour with a fire and horses?" The more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed. We were all pretty certain we had passed a field, but there was something unsettling about the idea that we hadn't noticed a group of people gathered around a fire. It didn't add up. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to turn back. It was only a few minutes later, after all, and we figured we'd just take a quick look to see if there was anything going on. We turned around and retraced our steps, walking past the same rows of houses, the same streetlights, and the same empty streets. Everything looked the same as before. But when we reached the spot where we thought the field had been, it was gone. Instead of a wide open space with a campfire and people riding horses, there was just more houses. Row after row of identical houses, exactly like all the others. There was no sign of the fire, no trace of people, no horses, nothing at all. We stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. The air felt thicker now, the streetlights casting long shadows that stretched unnaturally down the empty road. My friends and I exchanged confused glances, but neither of us said anything right away. "Are you sure this is the right spot?" my friend asked. His voice was a little shaky, like he wasn't quite sure himself. I looked around, trying to map out where we were. This was the road we had been walking down before, the same one we'd passed the field on. There was no mistaking it. This was the right place. But the field was gone, as if it had never existed in the first place. We walked up and down the street a few times, retracing our steps over and over again, hoping that we had just missed something, hoping that we'd find some trace of the field, the fire, the people. But no matter how many times we walked past the same houses, there was nothing. Just the same rows of identical homes, the same empty streets. No sign of any kind of gathering, no flickering light from a campfire. It was as if it had all been a hallucination, or maybe a trick of the light. We even checked the neighboring roads. We walked around for nearly half an hour, going in circles, hoping we'd find something to explain what we had seen. But there was no field, no horses, no people. It was like the whole thing had vanished into thin air. By this point, we were all starting to feel uneasy. It wasn't like we were completely drunk or anything. We had had a few drinks, but we were all pretty clear-headed. This wasn't something that could be chalked up to drunken imagination or some strange hallucination. We were all certain of what we had seen, and yet it had completely disappeared without a trace. We eventually gave up the search and headed back to the dorms, all of us silent, lost in our own thoughts. The walk back felt longer than the first time, the streetlights flickering in the distance like they were mocking us. We didn't talk about it much that night. There was a strange tension hanging in the air, something we couldn't shake off. It was like we were all just pretending nothing had happened, even though deep down, we all knew something had. Something that didn't make any sense. The next day, we laughed it off. We joked about it with the others, telling them how we had gone looking for some weird party in the middle of the night and ended up just walking around a bunch of houses. but the laughter didn't reach our eyes. We didn't really believe the joke ourselves. There was something unsettling about that night, something we couldn't explain. And to this day, I still don't know what happened. Maybe we'd missed something. Maybe we were all just caught in some weird collective delusion. Or maybe we were never meant to understand what we saw. But I'll never forget the feeling of walking past that field, of seeing the flickering campfire and hearing the music, and then turning around to find nothing at all. And every time I walk down that street, even in broad daylight, I can't shake the feeling that something is just a little off, that there's something I'm not seeing, something just out of reach. But maybe that's just me. Maybe I'll never know. It was a typical summer at the house, a small but cozy retreat tucked away in the hills of Greece. The air smelled of salt and pine, and the olive trees swayed lazily in the heat. Every summer, my family would spend weeks here, away from the rush of the city, soaking in the peace and serenity. It was supposed to be a time to relax and unwind, but over the years, the house started to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a place where unsettling things happened. One of the reasons for that was the gardener. His name was Nikos, a large man, and I mean large in every sense of the word. He was morbidly obese, with a belly so big that it looked like it could be a small mountain. It was almost impossible to find a shirt that fit him properly, so most of the time, he just wore an old, torn vest. The fabric stretched over his body, barely covering the rolls of fat that hung over his pants. He was always sweating, his face red from the effort of just walking across the garden. Every movement seemed like it took a monumental effort, and you could see him gasping for air, as if the simple act of living had become too much for him. He had worked for the family for years, taking care of the gardens, trimming the hedges, and sweeping up the fallen leaves. No one ever really knew why he stayed so long. Maybe it was the job security, or perhaps he just didn't have the energy to find something else. Regardless, Nikos was a constant presence around the house, and over time, it was hard not to notice how his size and health issues became more and more of a concern. I remember my friend telling me how his mother, who lived in America at the time, had a strange dream one night. She had always been a bit superstitious, believing in things like signs and premonitions. But this dream, it felt different. She dreamt that Nikos, the gardener, was gasping for breath, struggling with his weight, and then suddenly he just stopped. The dream was so vivid that it left her shaken when she woke up. It wasn't just the heaviness of the dream that disturbed her. It was the sense of impending doom that hung over it, like something terrible was going to happen. She couldn't shake the feeling, and it stayed with her all day. The next morning, as if on cue, the phone rang. Nikos had passed away in his sleep. It was a heart attack, something no one had really been surprised by. He had been getting slower and slower, his breathing more labored, and his energy levels had dropped to almost nothing. The news hit hard, of course, but there was something oddly fitting about it. Everyone knew that his health was fragile. He hadn't taken care of himself for years, and now it had caught up with him. The strange thing, though, was that my friend's mother had the same dream that night. This time, it was her husband who appeared in the dream, gasping for air. She woke up in a panic, her heart racing, her mind reeling from the similarity to the previous night's events. She was terrified that her husband, too, would succumb to the same fate. He was also morbidly obese, though he had always been a bit more careful about his health. But in that moment, standing in the cold darkness of the night, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. It was like her dreams were trying to warn her, telling her that the same thing would happen to him. The next morning, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She watched her husband more closely, noticing his slow movements and the way he seemed winded after just walking a short distance. But as the days passed, nothing happened. He was still around, still eating too much, still living his life in the same way he always had. She couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. But it didn't last forever. About a year ago, her husband too passed away. It wasn't a heart attack, but it was still a blow. His body, weakened by years of neglect, couldn't fight off a sudden illness. He died in his sleep peacefully, but it was hard not to feel the eerie similarity to the death of the gardener. The thought lingered in my mind for a long time after. Was it just coincidence, or was there something more to it? As I thought about it, I realized just how much time had passed. Nikos had been gone for years, but the memory of him still haunted the house. The garden had grown wild, the vines creeping up the walls of the house, as though they too were trying to reclaim something lost. The house felt quieter without him, though in a strange way. It also felt emptier. Nikos had been a part of the place for so long that it was impossible to imagine it without him. But what really unsettled me was how things seemed to unfold in the months after his death. Every time I visited, I couldn't help but feel a strange heaviness in the air, a sense that the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. It wasn't just the silence that got to me. It was the feeling that something was unfinished, something unresolved. It was like the house knew about the dreams, about the warnings, and it was holding on to them, refusing to let go. I remember one summer, about 3 years ago, when my friend's mother came back to Greece after everything had happened. She had been living in America for so long that the house seemed foreign to her, yet familiar at the same time. She told me that, after her husband passed away, she couldn't stop thinking about the dream, the feeling that there was something more to it. She said she felt like she was supposed to have done something, anything, to stop it from happening. The house was old, and the air was thick with dust and memories. The rooms seemed to stretch on forever, and the walls felt like they had secrets buried deep within them. Sometimes, when I sat in the garden, staring out at the olive trees, I felt like I was being watched. It was a strange sensation, one I couldn't explain, but it was always there, lurking just below the surface. I tried to shake it off, but it never went away. Years passed, and the house became more of a place for reflection than for relaxation. The memories of Nikos, of the dreams, of everything that had happened, seemed to linger like an unseen presence. There were no signs of ghosts or spirits, no strange occurrences to explain it, but I couldn't help but feel that something was always just out of reach, like I was standing on the edge of understanding, but never quite getting there. Then, a few months ago, my friend's mother called me again, this time with news that made my stomach turn. She told me that she had been feeling unwell, that her health was deteriorating, though not in the same way as before. There was something else, something she couldn't put into words. She said she had been feeling the same weight on her chest, the same sense of dread that had plagued her in the past. It was almost as if her body knew it was time. She went to the doctor, hoping for some reassurance, but the tests came back with nothing. There was no heart condition, no sign of illness. Yet, the feeling remained, gnawing at her, a reminder of everything that had happened in the past. It was like the house, the memories, were all coming to the surface again, and this time, they weren't going to let go. In the end, she passed away quietly, not from a heart attack or illness, but from the sheer weight of everything she had carried for so long. It wasn't an abrupt death like Nikos's, but it was just as final. The house felt emptier now, quieter in a way that made my skin crawl. There were no more dreams, no more warnings, just the silence of a place that had witnessed too much. I couldn't help but wonder if the house had always been more than just a building. Maybe it had been keeping track of all the things that had happened there, all the lives that had been lived and lost. Maybe in some strange way, it had been waiting for us to figure it out. But now, there was no one left to ask. I stayed in the house for a while after that, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the last one holding on to something that wasn't mine to keep. The garden grew wilder with each passing day, the vines creeping higher, the trees bending under their own weight. The house, once a place of peace, now felt like a tomb, holding the memories of everything that had come before. And in the end, I knew there was no escaping it. It was around 2 in the morning, and I was staying over at my buddy Matt's place, crashing for the night like I'd done countless times before. We were both 17 at the time, still in high school, and it was the kind of night where nothing particularly special was supposed to happen. Just a typical hangout. The house was pretty quiet. Nothing unusual, just the sounds of the world outside drifting through the thin walls. I had a hard time falling asleep at first, but I finally nodded off after a few hours of staring at the ceiling. But then, out of nowhere, I woke up. My eyes snapped open, but nothing felt right. I could tell that something was wrong from the second I came to. My whole body felt cold, like I was lying in an ice-cold room, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I couldn't move. I could feel my chest rising and falling as I tried to breathe, but I couldn't even lift a finger or shift my body. It was like everything was locked in place. My limbs were heavy, almost like they were being weighed down by some invisible force. I was paralyzed. At first, I thought I was just half awake, that I was caught in some weird sleep paralysis, but that didn't explain the fear that had suddenly crept in. It was more than just not being able to move. It was as if something was in the room with me. Something wrong. Something otherworldly. I tried to stay calm, tried to convince myself that this was just a bad dream or a hallucination. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, that cold feeling was there, crawling under my skin. I could hear nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the faint creak of the floorboards somewhere far off in the house. I turned my head, barely able to manage it, hoping to see the familiar shadows of Matt's room. But instead, I saw something else. A figure. It was like a hooded silhouette, but not like a person you'd recognize. It was just wrong. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It was just standing there in the corner of the room, and all I could see was the outline of its hood. I could almost make out the faintest glow from underneath, like the light from a dying star. But it wasn't a person. I knew that immediately. It didn't have any of the features you'd expect from a human figure. It was too ethereal, too unreal. My heart started to race, but I was still trapped, unable to do anything but stare. I tried to scream, to make any sound, but nothing came out. I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. I couldn't even manage to blink or tear my eyes away from the thing in the corner of the room. The longer I looked at it, the more real it became, and the more I felt like something terrible was about to happen. It was almost like the air itself was pressing in, suffocating me. Then, out of nowhere, the figure started moving. It didn't walk like a normal person. It glided, slowly floating toward me with no sound at all. Every inch closer it got, the colder the air around me became. I could feel this strange, cold, mist-like breath brushing against my skin, and with each passing second, the fear in me grew worse, tighter. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I still couldn't move. I couldn't even will my body to do anything. All I could do was lie there, staring at it as it closed the distance between us. It was like some kind of death, something so alien, so terrifying, that I couldn't even comprehend it. I felt like it was getting inside my head, its presence invading my very thoughts. It stopped behind me. I could feel the coldness, like it was surrounding me, like it was inside me. This was real. This wasn't just a nightmare. The cold wasn't just from the room. It was coming from that thing. My entire body shook with terror, but I couldn't move. And then, just as quickly as it had approached, it was gone. 1 second it was right behind me, and the next there was nothing. The air went from icy and suffocating to almost normal again. The heavy feeling that had weighed me down was suddenly gone, and for the first time since I'd woken up, I could move. I shot up in bed, gasping for air, my heart still racing. But the worst part, the most disturbing part, there was no transition. It didn't feel like I had been asleep and then woken up. There was no sense of time passing, no gradual shift from nightmare to reality. 1 second, I was paralyzed in fear. The next, I was wide awake, gasping for air, staring into the same room I had been in all along. I don't know how long I stayed awake after that. It felt like hours, but I didn't dare close my eyes. I stayed there, staring at the dark room, listening for any sounds. I kept expecting the thing to come back, to find me again. I knew I couldn't let my guard down. My mind was racing. Was I dreaming? Was I hallucinating? Could I really have seen something like that? Or was it just a trick of the mind? The coldness, the way it felt like I had just escaped something dangerous. It felt too real to be a dream, but I couldn't explain it. Matt was asleep in the bed across from mine, totally oblivious, and I couldn't shake the feeling that if I let myself relax, if I let my guard down for even a second, that thing would come back. But it didn't. It stayed away. As the night dragged on, the fear started to fade a little, but the unease didn't go away. I lay there, awake the entire time, watching the light outside slowly begin to change as the first rays of dawn began to filter through the window. The shadows in the room started to shift, and I could finally breathe a little easier, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I had seen that night wasn't something that could be easily explained. When the sun finally came up, I was exhausted, but I couldn't bring myself to fall back to sleep. Matt woke up a little later, acting like everything was normal, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. What had happened? Was it just sleep paralysis? Was it some kind of hallucination caused by stress or lack of sleep? Or had I actually seen something that night, something real, something unnatural? I never brought it up to Matt. What would I say? Hey man, I saw some creepy hooded figure in your room last night, and it nearly gave me a heart attack. I wasn't even sure what to make of it myself. It didn't feel like a dream, but it didn't feel entirely real either. It was like something in between a blurry line between the waking world and something darker. For weeks after that night, I couldn't shake the memory. I kept waking up with that cold feeling, expecting to see the figure standing in the corner of my room again, but it never came back. I don't know if I'll ever really know what happened that night. Maybe it was just a really vivid nightmare, a product of my brain playing tricks on me. But part of me wonders, what if it wasn't? What if there's something more to that night than just a bad dream? I'll never know for sure. All I do know is that it left me with a chill I can't shake to this day. And that feeling of being watched, it hasn't really gone away. I've gotten better at ignoring it, but I still don't sleep the same. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed late at night, I can't help but feel like something's there, just out of sight, waiting. It was about a year ago when the first strange thing happened. It was late, probably around 1 a.m. I remember it clearly because I had been up late watching TV in the living room. My mom was asleep, and my little sister was tucked into bed. My dad was working in another town, and my brother was out with friends, so the house was eerily quiet. I had the TV volume turned up louder than usual, so I didn't mind the silence much. It made everything feel less lonely, even though it was just the three of us at home. I went into the kitchen to grab some water. The night was still, no noise from the outside. As I reached for the glass, I heard a sharp sound, like glass shattering. It was loud enough that it made me freeze for a second. At first, I thought it was just the TV. Maybe I had missed something during the show, or it was some sound effect that slipped past my notice. I figured it wasn't worth investigating. Maybe a window in the show had broken, or maybe it was just part of the background noise. I shrugged it off, filling my glass and returning to the living room. I drank the water, distracted by whatever was happening on TV, but as I sat back on the couch, something didn't feel quite right. It's hard to explain, but I had a sense of unease, like something was off. I turned down the volume a bit, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Everything seemed normal again, but that nagging feeling stayed with me, like a quiet whisper in the back of my mind. I shook it off and decided to call it a night. I went upstairs to my room around 4 a.m., and that's when I noticed it. The window above my bed was broken. I had been asleep for several hours before that, so I didn't hear anything. But there it was, the glass shattered around the window frame, some of it still hanging by tiny slivers of the window's edge. I stood there for a second, staring at it, my heart thumping. I couldn't understand how I hadn't heard it. The window wasn't big enough for a person to crawl through, but still, the sight of it made my stomach drop. I was freaked out, but I didn't want to wake my mom or sister. Maybe a branch had blown into it or something. The wind had been pretty strong that night, and I tried to rationalize it, but the unease I'd felt earlier came back in full force. I pushed it aside and got into bed, telling myself I'd figure it out in the morning. I eventually fell asleep, but the sleep wasn't peaceful. I kept waking up, my eyes darting to the broken window, wondering if someone had done it. The next week was quiet, almost too quiet. I tried not to think about the window. My dad was back in town, and everything seemed normal again. But then it happened again. The knocking. It was the same time as before, around 1 a.m. I had just gotten comfortable in bed, trying to shake off the day's tiredness, when I heard it. Someone was knocking on the front door. The sound was light at first, just tapping. I thought maybe it was some prankster, but the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, more forceful, until it sounded like banging. Whoever was at the door wasn't letting up. My mom sleeps like a rock, so I knew she wouldn't hear it. My little sister was already asleep, unaware of the chaos building in the house. My heart raced, my mind racing even faster, trying to figure out why someone would be at the door at 1 a.m. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it didn't make sense for someone to come by so late. I stayed still for a few moments, hoping the sound would stop, that maybe it was just a neighbor or something, but the banging only got louder. My legs froze in place, and I knew I couldn't just ignore it. I didn't feel safe just lying there, waiting for whoever was knocking to go away. After a minute or so, I decided to get up. I quietly left my room and walked down the hallway toward the front door. I was still trying to convince myself that it was nothing, just some dumb prank or someone looking for directions or whatever. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I reached the door, pressed my face against the peephole, and looked out. There was no one there. I was puzzled. I stayed there for a few more seconds, my hand still on the door handle. Maybe the person had left, or maybe they were just standing out of view. I wasn't sure. But then, I did something I hadn't even planned. I walked over to the kitchen window that looks out onto the driveway. I peered through the blinds, my breath shallow as I tried to get a better look at the yard. That's when I saw him. The figure was walking from the side of the house, heading toward the front door. My stomach sank. The man was moving slow, almost deliberately, as though he was trying to be quiet, but I could still see him clearly. He was tall, thin, wearing a dark hoodie. His face was hidden in shadow, but I could see his outline as he reached the front door. My mind raced. I didn't recognize him at all. He wasn't someone from around the neighborhood, not someone I had ever seen before. He stood at the door, banging on it again, more urgently this time, as if he knew I was behind the door waiting. I was frozen, my eyes glued to the peephole. I didn't know what to do. My heart was pounding so loudly in my chest, I thought it might give me away. I could feel the cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. Then something even worse happened. He moved. Slowly. He crouched down, and before I could process what he was doing, I saw his face pressed right up against the peephole. His eyes were wide, and his expression was hard to make out in the dark, but he didn't seem to be in any hurry. He was looking right at me through the hole, and I couldn't look away. My body felt paralyzed. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. He stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, just staring at the peephole, waiting. Then, with a strange, almost amused expression, he started to giggle. It was soft at first, like a muffled chuckle, but it grew louder. His hands gripped the door handle, twisting it over and over, shaking it like he was testing if it was locked. The sound of his laugh grew louder, more unsettling, as he kept shaking the handle, as though enjoying the fear he was causing. I stood there, motionless, my heart thundering in my chest. I couldn't take my eyes off him, couldn't tear myself away. My whole body was screaming at me to do something, to go back to my room, to wake up my mom, but I couldn't move. The man stopped laughing after a while, and without a word, he backed away from the door. He walked down the front steps, slowly, like he had all the time in the world. My pulse slowed, and I almost convinced myself that it was over. But then, midway to the street, he stopped. He turned around and stared at the door. His gaze was cold, fixed on the spot where I had been standing, watching. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, his eyes never leaving the door. I could barely breathe, feeling like my every move was being watched. And then, just as I thought he was going to come back, he turned and walked toward his vehicle. He got into the car and drove off, leaving the house in silence once again. I was still frozen at the window, unsure of what to do. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. Who was that guy? What did he want? Why did he do all of that? I didn't wait any longer. I ran to my mom's room, shaking her awake. I was barely able to get the words out, but she must have seen the fear in my eyes. She got up and followed me back to the window, but when we got there, he was already gone. The driveway was empty. The street was empty. It was like he had never been there at all. My mom called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing to investigate. No sign of the man, no evidence of anything that had happened. The officers said it might have been a prank, but I knew better. The whole thing felt wrong. That man hadn't been there just to mess with us. He had a purpose, something more sinister in mind, but I couldn't figure out what it was. To this day, I don't know who he was or why he came to our house. I still think about it sometimes, especially when it's quiet at night, when I'm alone in the house. I never saw him again, but the feeling of his eyes staring through that peephole, the sound of his laugh, still haunts me. It was as if he knew something I didn't, like he had been watching us long before that night. My family still doesn't know what happened. They joke about it, saying I saw a ghost or something, but I know what I saw, and I'll never forget that night. Never. I've never been one for feeling truly safe when my parents weren't around. It wasn't that I felt scared of our house or neighborhood, but there was always that nagging feeling that anything could happen if you were left alone long enough. My brother and I were probably around 12 and 14 at the time, and our parents decided to head out for a night of whatever it is they did when they left us behind. We didn't think much of it. The house was old, a converted two-family bungalow that felt like it had a story behind every creak and groan of the wood. It was set up weird, kind of long and narrow, with rooms connected by narrow hallways, and a back door that led straight into my brother's bedroom. The house was a little rundown, but it was ours. That night, it felt quieter than usual, even though we were the only two people inside. It started out like any other night when we were left alone. My brother and I would grab some junk food, play video games, and generally try to stay out of trouble. The quiet of the house, though, kept gnawing at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I was on edge, but I just chalked it up to being alone. We didn't get much company out in the middle of nowhere, and the only noises I ever heard were the odd squeaks from the old house and the occasional car passing on the street out front. We were lounging in the living room, playing some game on the old TV, when we heard the sound. It wasn't much at first, just a faint rattle from the back door. The kind of noise that might come from wind, or maybe an animal bumping against the door. But then it came again, a more deliberate sound, jiggling, not the wind, not a casual mistake. The door handle rattled, like someone was trying to get in. My heart kicked up a notch, and I glanced over at my brother. He wasn't the type to jump at things, so if he was still paying attention, that meant something was off. Without a word, my brother stood up, the look on his face turning serious. He didn't waste time either. He walked straight to the hallway, down the narrow hall that led to his bedroom where the back door was. I followed right behind him, my hands instinctively reaching for the old shotgun that my dad had left for us, just in case. Mine was a Remington 1112 gauge. I had fired it a few times, and it was a heavy thing. I'd never really had to use it for anything serious, but I knew how to handle it. My brother grabbed the old double-barrel shotgun, probably even older than the house itself. It was something our grandfather had passed down, one of those guns that seemed too simple to be effective, but anyone who'd ever used one knew how dangerous it could be. We crept quietly toward the back of the house. The noise had stopped for a second, but I didn't feel any better. That's when I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of someone messing with the door handle, trying to jiggle it open. I glanced at my brother, and he nodded, giving me a quick look that said, "Stay cool." I had never been in a situation like this before. Sure, there had been rumors about strange people in the area, maybe someone trying to steal something from one of the nearby farms, but nothing ever really came of it. Until now. The rattling stopped for a second, and then the door creaked. Someone was trying to open it, maybe thinking it wasn't locked. My brother didn't hesitate anymore. He swung the back door open with a sharp jerk, the heavy wood slamming against the frame. I was right behind him, gun up and aimed at the ground in front of me. The moment I saw him, I knew I wasn't going to need to do anything. My brother was handling this. The guy was standing there, right in the threshold of the door. He was disheveled, wearing some sort of dirty jacket and torn jeans, looking like someone who had been out drinking for way too long. I could smell the alcohol from where I stood, and there was something off about the way he was standing, like he wasn't all there. "I think I'm at the wrong house," he said. The words were slurred, and I could barely make them out. His eyes were glassy, and his posture was sloppy. He looked like he had been stumbling around, not sure where he was. I couldn't figure out if he was lost, drunk, or if he was just trying to bluff his way through something. My brother didn't say a word. He just pointed the double-barrel shotgun at the guy's chest, steady and unwavering. The guy didn't even seem to react at first. He just blinked at the gun, like he couldn't quite process what was happening. "You need to get the hell off our property," my brother finally said. His voice was low but firm. There wasn't any doubt in his tone. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. I stood there, my heart pounding, but I wasn't sure if I should move or not. The guy hadn't made any threatening moves, but there was something unsettling about the way he was acting. If he had any intentions of causing trouble, we were ready. I wasn't about to let some stranger get the drop on us in our own house. The man blinked again, his eyes focusing a little more this time. He finally seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation. He looked at the shotgun and then back at us. For a split second, there was a moment of hesitation. I thought for a second that he might try something crazy. But then, with a slow, almost exaggerated movement, he raised his hands and stepped back. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his words thick with drunken slur. He didn't even seem embarrassed or shocked anymore. He just kept backing up slowly. My brother didn't lower the gun. He kept it pointed at the guy the whole time. The man took another step back, and then another. He turned around, stumbling in the soft dirt, and started to walk away. I kept my eyes on him until he rounded the corner of the house and disappeared into the darkness. The whole time, I felt like I was holding my breath. Once he was out of sight, my brother closed the door and locked it again. We stood there for a second, the weight of the situation sinking in. Neither of us spoke for a while. We didn't really have to talk about what happened. It was one of those situations that just didn't need words. I don't know what the guy's deal was. Maybe he was just lost. Maybe he had some bad intentions. Either way, we had taken care of it. We were safe. After a while, I realized how lucky we were to have had those guns. They weren't just sitting in the corner for show. My dad had taught us how to use them for protection, and that night, they kept us from getting hurt, maybe even worse. It's strange how fast your perspective shifts in situations like that. You go from just trying to make it through a boring night alone to having to make split-second decisions about whether someone's a threat. We would have been in trouble without those guns, no doubt. We spent the rest of the night in silence, sitting in the living room, not even turning the game back on. The quiet of the house felt heavier now, more oppressive, like there was a weight to the air. We kept the lights low and didn't venture outside again. It wasn't until our parents got home that we let out a breath and acted like nothing had happened. They never knew what had gone down that night. But we did. We knew how close it could have gotten. I was 15, just starting to grasp the reality of how the world works beyond school and friends. A typical Saturday afternoon with my mom, doing the usual grocery shopping. We didn't usually talk much while we were in the store. She was focused on getting things on the list, and I was the one who hated the whole shopping experience. But today was a bit different. Mom seemed to be in one of her moods, the kind where she wandered from aisle to aisle, inspecting things as if she had all the time in the world. I didn't mind too much. I had my headphones in, trying to ignore the noise around me, just going through the motions. We'd been walking up and down the aisles for about an hour. I was getting tired of it, tired of the fluorescent lights above me and the constant noise of people talking, pushing their carts, and items clinking as they were stacked onto conveyor belts at the checkout. Mom was looking for some canned tomatoes, and she asked me to get something for her from the next aisle over. I was just a bit annoyed, but it was a small thing to do. Besides, I was trying to keep myself distracted, so I walked over to the next aisle. It wasn't a huge store, but the aisles felt narrow, like everything was crammed into this tight space. As I turned the corner into the next aisle, I noticed a man standing further down the row. He was the only one there. I didn't think much of him at first, just another shopper, right? But then I stopped. Something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was like my instincts kicked in, telling me to be cautious. He was standing still, not looking around, just staring at the shelf with a sort of intensity. The aisle was narrow enough that I couldn't easily avoid him without passing close by. I couldn't see what exactly he was looking at, but his posture was odd. He looked sort of stiff, not relaxed. And there was something in his body language that made me uneasy. He wasn't just glancing over the shelves like a normal person. He was waiting. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. My first instinct was to just walk away, but I couldn't. Mom had asked me to find this item, and it was the right aisle. So, reluctantly, I started walking toward him. Slowly. My footsteps felt louder than usual as I tried to give him space, moving around, making sure to stay at least a few feet away from him. I kept my eyes on the shelf, pretending I wasn't really noticing the man. He hadn't moved, still standing where he was, his eyes fixed on whatever it was he was looking at. But the longer I stood there, the more I felt like I was trapped. The way he stood, so still, unnerving. And every time I moved to get a bit closer, he didn't budge. That feeling inside me, the one you get when you sense something isn't right, kept growing stronger. He was taller than me, chubby in a way that made him look uncomfortably stiff, like he wasn't able to bend in all the right places. He wore a checkered shirt, the kind that looked out of place on someone his size, and slacks. Everything about him screamed unusual. I tried to delay, walking slowly, taking in the shelves, hoping he would just move on. But he didn't. I couldn't make myself go down the aisle, not with him standing there. It was like he was deliberately taking up space, blocking me from reaching the products I needed. After a minute of this, I had no choice. I pushed myself forward. My heart pounded in my chest. I took slow, careful steps toward the spot where the item was supposed to be. As I passed by him, I tried not to look too much at him, just keeping my eyes ahead, glancing quickly to see if I could find what Mom needed. My breath caught in my throat as I reached the spot behind him, where I could see the item I needed. The moment I stopped, he turned around. His face was bright red. Too red, almost as if he'd been holding his breath for too long. He stared at me with wide eyes, like he had just realized I was there. He was too close, too sudden, and it took everything in me not to recoil. I froze for a second, unsure what to do. His eyes flicked to the product, then back to me, and he spoke, his voice gruff and thick. He asked if I knew where something was, but his tone was off. It was strange. The way he looked at me felt almost like he was expecting me to answer with something else, like his question wasn't really about the product at all. I didn't respond right away. My mind was racing, and I just shook my head quickly. I couldn't tell him anything. I was already looking past him, scanning the shelf. That was when I saw the item. I grabbed it quickly, but I felt him still watching me, his eyes locked on my every movement. I didn't know why, but something inside me told me to move fast. And then it happened. As I reached down to grab the item, his hand landed on my shoulder. Cold. Too cold. It was heavy on me, firm but oddly gentle. It was like he'd been waiting for that exact moment to touch me. His voice, low and slow, said one word. Yeah. I felt my heart skip a beat. It was as though time slowed down in that second. His breath was almost too close, and I could feel the weight of his hand, an unwanted pressure on me. I didn't think, I just reacted. I yanked the item off the shelf, pulled myself away from his grip, and backed up quickly. I couldn't get away fast enough. I had to get out of there. My breath came fast, my body shaking, but I forced myself to walk quickly down the aisle, keeping my eyes straight ahead, not daring to look back. I didn't want to see if he was still watching me, but I couldn't help it. As I reached the end of the aisle, I dared to glance back for a split second, and there he was, still standing in the same spot, staring at me. His eyes were fixed on me like I was something he needed to remember, something he didn't want to let go of. His gaze followed me until I rounded the corner. I found Mum a few minutes later. I didn't say anything about what had happened. Mum didn't ask why I was shaking, why I had taken longer than usual. She was too busy picking out fruit or something else to notice. I kept my mouth shut. There was no way I could explain it. It would have sounded ridiculous. But I couldn't shake the feeling, the way he'd touched me, the way he had stared after me. The rest of the shopping trip passed in a blur. I kept my head down, avoiding looking at anyone else. I couldn't stop thinking about that man, about how his presence had made my skin crawl. My stomach was in knots for the rest of the day. I tried to push it out of my mind as I got older. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid. But every now and then, when I'm in a store or walking through a crowded space, that feeling comes back. The one where I feel like I'm being watched, like someone is paying too much attention to me. And I can't help but wonder, what if he was just waiting for someone? What if I had been the one he'd been planning to approach? I was 13 when it first happened. My parents had gone out of town for a weekend trip, nothing fancy, just some sort of getaway they planned months ahead. I don't even remember where they went now. All I remember is that it was just me, my younger sister, and our grandmother left in the house for those few days. She stayed with us when our parents were out, and it wasn't the first time. My grandma wasn't the kind of person who hovered around or acted like a babysitter. She usually stayed in the guest room, watched her shows, and let us do our thing. She was quiet, not much of a talker, and liked to go to bed early. That weekend wasn't any different. I got sick that day. Not just a sniffle or a cough. I mean that slow creeping, full-body weakness that comes before your body completely gives up on you. I had chills, aches, and a sore throat so bad it hurt to swallow water. I laid on the couch in the living room under a fleece blanket, half watching the TV and half dozing in and out of sleep while my sister played in our shared bedroom. By nighttime, my fever had spiked. I could feel my skin sweating, but also shivering. My body felt heavy and light at the same time, and it was hard to tell if I was dreaming or awake. Eventually, I must have drifted off completely because I don't remember hearing the TV anymore, and I definitely didn't feel anyone turn it off. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up. The living room was dark except for the faint blue glow from a night light in the hallway. It cast long shadows across the walls, barely enough to make out shapes. I felt hot but cold, like my skin was on fire, but my bones were frozen. My eyes were dry, and my mouth tasted sour. I reached for the water on the table, but didn't drink it right away. Something felt wrong. I don't know why I looked toward the hallway, but I did. Maybe I heard something. Maybe I just sensed something. But the moment I turned my head, I saw her. A little girl was standing half outside the doorway to my sister's bedroom. Her body was halfway in the room and halfway out, just holding still, frozen in a weird posture like she was leaning against the frame without actually resting on it. Her arms hung at her sides, stiff and straight. She wasn't moving, not even a little. At first, I thought it was my sister. She was around 9 back then. Maybe she had gotten up to use the bathroom or was sleepwalking. I couldn't see her face clearly, just her silhouette. Her hair looked a little longer than my sister's, but it was dark and messy, and in that lighting, it was hard to tell. I blinked slowly, rubbed my eyes, and asked if she was okay. My voice came out hoarse and weak, barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. She didn't move. I blinked again, a little more alert now, and called her name. That's when her face turned slightly, just enough for the hallway light to hit one of her eyes. It caught a reflection, not like an animal's glow, but something dull and strange. A weird shine that didn't look human. The rest of her face was still in shadow, but that eye alone gave it away. I knew in that second that it wasn't my sister. I couldn't move. My body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My chest tightened, my fingers twitched under the blanket, but I couldn't lift them. I couldn't even shift to one side. I was frozen, not because something was holding me down, but because I was so overwhelmed with fear that my muscles just stopped working. Then she turned completely and slipped back into the bedroom. Gone. Not a sound. Not a footstep. Nothing. It took me what felt like hours to finally push the blanket off and get to my feet. My legs were shaking so badly, I had to hold onto the arm of the couch for balance. I shuffled across the living room, trying not to make noise, even though I didn't know who or what I was trying to be quiet for. I peeked down the hall, then toward the bedroom. The door was cracked open, just like before. The inside was pitch black. I wanted to check on my sister, but I couldn't do it. I stood outside the door, staring into the dark room, holding my breath, and praying for some sound that would tell me she was okay. A snore, a sigh, anything. After maybe 10 minutes, I finally heard a soft rustling inside, and then the creak of the mattress springs. I backed away slowly, went back to the couch, and sat with my knees pulled to my chest, staring at the ceiling until the sun started to rise. I never told anyone about that night. I convinced myself I'd been hallucinating from the fever. I was sick, maybe delirious. It was probably just a bad dream. Something about the room, the lighting, the shadows, and being half-conscious must have messed with my head. But even now, thinking back on it, I remember how real it felt. I wasn't dreaming. I was awake. I know I was. After my parents got back, things went back to normal. I got better. The memory faded over time, even though I never forgot it completely. A few years passed. I turned 16. By then, my sister had her own room upstairs, and I got the old room to myself. That same bedroom where I'd seen the girl. It felt weird at first. The walls still had little stickers and stars she'd put up, and the closet had pink hangers left inside. But it was my room now. I repainted it, put up my own posters, moved my desk in, and filled the bookshelf with my junk. It felt like a fresh start, but I never slept well in there. Even when I wasn't thinking about that night, something always felt off. I'd wake up in the middle of the night for no reason. Sometimes I'd feel like someone had touched my arm or shoulder. Other times I'd think I heard something, breathing, soft footsteps, rustling, but there was never anything there. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination or just the house settling. That's what people always say, right? But then one night, it was different. I don't remember what time it was, but it was late. Everyone else was asleep. The room was dead quiet. No wind, no traffic, no house noises. I was asleep too, I think, and then suddenly I wasn't. I woke up like someone had flipped a switch. Just wide awake. No sound had startled me. No dream. Just this gut-deep feeling that something wasn't right. I didn't open my eyes right away. I just laid there, completely still, trying to figure out what had woken me. Then I felt it. A pressure. Not on my chest or my arms or anything physical like that. It was more like something invisible was weighing down the entire room. A presence. Like someone was standing over me, watching. I opened my eyes. It took them a second to adjust to the darkness. The hallway light was off, and the only glow came from the tiny alarm clock on the shelf. A dull red, but I could still make out shapes, outlines. My bookshelf, my desk, the chair with clothes on it, and something else. There was someone crouched at the foot of my bed. At first, I couldn't process what I was seeing. I just stared, trying to make sense of the shape in front of me. The longer I looked, the clearer it became. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a pile of clothes or a trick of the shadows. It was a person, a woman maybe, but barely. She had long, tangled black hair that hung over her face like wet strings. Her skin was pale in a way that didn't look right, like wax, like plastic. And her eyes were open wide, too wide. They didn't reflect anything. They just stared straight into mine, unblinking. She wasn't breathing. Or maybe she was, but I couldn't hear it. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She just crouched there like some kind of animal ready to pounce. I couldn't move again, just like before. My whole body went cold. I could feel sweat on my back soaking into the sheets. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would shake the bed. But I couldn't do anything. I couldn't yell. Couldn't sit up. I couldn't even close my eyes. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't look away. Then, all at once, she was gone. No movement. No crawling. No getting up. Just gone. Like I'd blinked and she vanished. I laid there until morning, drenched in sweat, eyes open until they burned, not daring to move. After that night, I refused to sleep in that room alone. I told my sister I missed our old setup and asked if we could go back to sharing a room. She agreed without asking any questions. I think deep down she didn't like that room either. She never said anything, but she never argued. We shared a room until I moved out years later. That old bedroom, the one I had for only a little while, became the junk room. The one with the old exercise bike, boxes of decorations, seasonal stuff, and old clothes nobody wanted to throw away. No one slept there again. It wasn't ghosts. It wasn't demons or spirits or haunted dolls or any of that movie crap. It was something real. Something about the way our minds work when we're sick, when we're growing, when we're scared and tired and alone in a house that creaks and groans and holds onto memories. Maybe it was sleep paralysis. Maybe it was some kind of stress hallucination. Maybe my brain was trying to tell me something I couldn't understand at the time. But I remember what I saw. I remember the weight of those moments, the feeling of being watched, and the way my body refused to move when every part of me was screaming to run. Some rooms just hold on to things. Not ghosts, not monsters, just moments, feelings, imprints of fear that never really fade, even after the furniture changes and the people grow up. That room's just storage now, but I still don't like going in there. Even when I do, I leave the door open and the hallway light on. I don't linger, and I never sit on the bed. The night was quiet, too quiet, and I hate that kind of silence, especially now that we were living in this house in the woods. My husband, Jake, and I had just moved in, just a few days ago, to a house that had been in his family for decades. His grandmother had just passed away, and although she hadn't lived in this house for years, it still felt like it was hers in a way. The house next to ours, the one she had lived in, was empty now. The only things living there were the memories of her, and those still felt thick in the air. Jake had always been a grandmother's boy, as everyone used to call him. He practically lived at her house growing up, and even as an adult, he'd always had a soft spot for her. I'd never been sure about it. I mean, I understood he loved her, but to me, the house always seemed so cold. Not in a creepy way, just in a way that felt lonely, like it had been forgotten by time. This place, the one we were staying in now, was even more isolated. There were no neighbors for miles. The woods surrounded the house on all sides, and although I loved the peace of it, there were moments when I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I mean, I'm a little jumpy anyway. I scare easily, especially when it's dark and quiet. And trust me, it was always dark and quiet here. Too quiet. It was our third night in the house. Jake had just finished working a late shift, and we were finally getting settled in. The baby was asleep in the nursery, the sound of her little breaths coming through the baby monitor. I had just taken a shower, and the hot water had helped loosen the tension in my shoulders. It was about 10 p.m. by the time I was sitting on the couch in the living room, wrapped in a towel, staring at the TV. Jake was in the master bathroom, taking his shower, and I was trying to unwind. The house was still and calm, almost too calm. It was the kind of night where every little sound seemed amplified. The wind outside was howling through the trees, and I could hear the occasional rustling of branches hitting against the window. It sounded like something was scratching at the glass, but I knew it was just the trees, just the wind, right? I was trying to focus on the TV, but it wasn't working. My mind kept wandering, and every time I looked up, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch longer than usual. The dim light from the table lamp barely lit up the space, and it created an eerie feeling in the room. I glanced at the hallway to the dining room, then back at the screen, trying to ignore the anxiety creeping up my spine. And that's when it happened. The dining room light flicked on. I froze. I couldn't move. My heart raced, and a chill ran down my spine. The light in the dining room wasn't something we ever used. It was one of those old, antique-style lamps that didn't really go with anything else in the room. The bulb was barely hanging on, and the switch had always been a little finicky, so I never expected it to work properly. But it was on now. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, trying to convince myself that I wasn't seeing things. Maybe it was a glitch, maybe the light bulb had finally decided to give up. But the way it flickered, almost as if it was testing whether it should stay on, made my stomach flip. I felt my pulse quicken as I slowly stood up, my mind racing. What was going on? I glanced back at the hallway, trying to rationalize it. I could hear the shower running. Jake hadn't come out yet, so it wasn't him. I didn't want to move, didn't want to take my eyes off the light. But I had to. I quickly got up from the couch, my legs shaky, and ran to the master bathroom door, flinging it open. "Jake!" I yelled, my voice coming out shaky. "Jake, you won't believe what just happened." But I didn't wait for a response. I didn't have the courage to stand there and wait for him to dismiss me. I was already turning to head back to the living room, but as I did, I heard it. The light clicked off. I stopped dead in my tracks. The air felt thick, heavier now, like the walls were closing in around me. I was trembling, trying to convince myself that I was just imagining it. But I couldn't. The light had definitely turned on, and now it was off. There was no mistake about it. I stood there for a moment, my heart hammering in my chest. Every part of me screamed to run out of the house, to grab our baby and get the hell out of there. But I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor. I finally took a deep breath, turned around, and walked slowly back to the living room. I had to check it for myself. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe it was some trick of the light, the way the shadows played in the room. But no, the light was off now, just like I had seen it. I had to tell Jake. He had to believe me. I couldn't be the only one scared out of my mind. I turned to run back to the bathroom and tell him, but my knees buckled. I almost collapsed on the floor. The fear had a grip on me now, and it wasn't letting go. I couldn't go back alone. I couldn't stay in this house by myself, especially with that damn light doing whatever it wanted. I ran back to the bathroom door, almost in a panic, and knocked frantically. "Jake, you need to come out here." I yelled, my voice tight with fear. "Please, I swear I'm not joking." I could hear the shower water still running, but there was no answer. The sound of it hitting the tile felt deafening now, louder than it had before. I couldn't wait any longer. I swung the door open and stood there in the doorway, breathless, trying to get my words out. "Jake," the light in the dining room. It turned on, and then it turned off. "Please, I'm not making this up. I'm scared." That's when he finally stepped out of the bathroom, wearing just a towel, his face filled with confusion. I knew he didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes. He didn't want to believe me. He thought I was just playing a prank. But I wasn't laughing. I was shaking, tears welling up in my eyes. He must have seen something in my face because he stopped. His eyes softened, and he stepped closer. "Okay," he said, his voice softer now. "Let's go check it out together." I nodded, still unable to move, still terrified. He reached out for my hand, and I gripped it tightly. We walked back into the living room together, both of us looking around, expecting something to jump out at us, to do something. But the light was off now, just as it had been before. Jake frowned. He checked the light switch and gave it a flick. Nothing happened. He looked back at me, his eyebrows furrowing. "It's just a bad bulb, babe," he said, but his voice was different now. He was trying to stay calm, but I could hear the uncertainty in it. I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream at him, tell him that I wasn't imagining it. But I didn't. I was too scared to argue. Instead, I nodded weakly, still feeling the weight of that chill in my chest. But then something happened that made everything worse. We heard a soft cry, a faint whimpering from the baby monitor. Our baby, our little girl. She was awake, and she was crying. Jake immediately ran for her room, his heart in his throat. I followed behind him, my legs barely holding me up. When we reached the nursery, the room was dark, save for the dim glow of the nightlight. The baby was standing up in her crib, her face wet with tears. Her eyes were wide with fear. I rushed to her, picking her up and holding her close. "It's okay, baby, it's okay," I whispered, rocking her gently. But even as I comforted her, the fear I had felt before was only getting worse. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Jake went to check the rest of the house, searching every room, every corner. He came back moments later, his face pale. "There's nothing here," he said, his voice tight. But I could feel it. There was something wrong with this house. Something I couldn't explain. Something that made my skin crawl. We locked ourselves in the bedroom that night, holding each other and the baby close. The house felt bigger now, like it was swallowing us whole. The wind howled outside, and the trees creaked, their branches scratching against the windows. We spent the rest of the night in silence, the only sound our breathing and the soft whimpers of the baby. It wasn't until the next morning, when the sunlight finally broke through the trees and flooded the room, that I started to feel like I could breathe again. But even then, I couldn't forget the feeling. The fear was still with me deep down. And the worst part, the lights still flickered sometimes. Just once in a while, when the house was at its quietest, I'd see the faintest flicker from the dining room. But every time it happened, I'd glance over at Jake, and he'd always just shrug it off. I don't know if he believed me. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But we both knew one thing for sure. This house wasn't just a home. It was something else, something that lived in the woods, and it was watching us. And it wasn't going to let us go that easily. This happened just last night, and I still feel a little weird thinking about it. I keep going over it again and again in my head, trying to make sense of everything, trying to figure out what was real and what might have just been my brain half awake. But some things you just can't shake. I'm not the type of person who jumps to conclusions. I don't scare easy, but I also don't ignore my gut when something feels wrong. So, I sleep on the first floor of my house. It's a small place, nothing fancy, but it's enough for me. My room's tucked into the back corner, right next to the yard. The window in my room is about 10 feet off the ground from the outside, which I always thought made it feel safe. Like, even though it's on the first floor, nobody could just walk up and peer inside without a ladder or something. The window is also right next to my bed. It's a wide horizontal-style window, the kind that slides open sideways instead of up and down. There's a screen on it, but I've taken that out since spring started because it was getting in the way. I like fresh air when I sleep. The room gets stuffy otherwise. That night, I had fallen asleep with the window open, like I usually do. The air was cool and calm. There was a breeze, nothing too strong, just enough to ruffle the curtains a little. I remember lying on my side, facing the wall, my back to the window. The sheets were kicked halfway off me. It was late, well past midnight, maybe around 2 or 3 in the morning. Everything was quiet, the kind of quiet that you only get that late at night. You could hear your own heartbeat if you listened close enough. Crickets outside, distant wind through the trees, just the usual soft night sounds. I don't remember dreaming about anything. One moment I was out cold, the next I was in that strange space between being asleep and awake. You know the one, your body feels heavy, your thoughts are fuzzy, and you're not really sure what's going on yet. That's where I was when it happened. I felt something hit me. In the back, right between my shoulder blades. Not a slap, not a shove, but a solid push, like a punch without the fist fully tightened. It wasn't hard enough to knock the wind out of me, but it was firm, deliberate, real. It jolted me fully awake. My eyes snapped open, heart instantly racing. I turned around so fast I twisted the sheets around my legs. But there was nothing. No one there. Just my room. Dim shadows cast from the hallway light I always leave on. The curtains by the window were still, gently shifting from the slight breeze that usually came in through the open window. Except when I looked closer, the window was shut, locked. The latch was even down. I froze for a second. My mind was running a million miles a minute. I could have sworn I left it open. I always do. It's like second nature by now. I even have a routine before bed. Turn off the overhead light, slide the window open halfway, make sure nothing's stuck in the track, then lie down. I had done it the same way every night for months. Still, I told myself maybe I forgot. Maybe I'd thought about opening it, but didn't. Or maybe one of my roommates had come in and closed it. But that didn't make sense either. My door had been shut. I would have heard them come in, right? Plus, it's weird for someone to just come in and close a window without saying anything, especially in the middle of the night. Trying to brush it off, I sat up, legs hanging off the side of the bed, and got up to open the window again. That's when I saw him. At first, I didn't even realize what I was looking at. My eyes had adjusted to the dark, but it still took me a moment to process what I was seeing. In my neighbor's yard, about 30, maybe 40 feet away, there was a man standing there. He wasn't moving, just standing still in the grass. The way the streetlight hit the edge of their lawn, he was half in shadow, half illuminated. He wasn't facing me straight on. His body was facing toward the street, but his head was turned completely around, looking right at me, like he was staring directly through the window. I didn't move. My heart was thudding so loud I thought he'd hear it. I could feel my pulse in my neck, my ears, even my fingers. It was like every muscle in my body had locked up all at once. I couldn't even breathe right. I looked harder. His shape was mostly a silhouette, but I could make out enough. He was tall. Not freakishly tall, but tall enough to be noticeable, probably over 6 feet. He was holding something in his right hand. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. I thought it might have just been a stick or something, but then I saw the way it reflected a bit of light. It was a wooden plank, like an old board, rough around the edges. Not a baseball bat, not a pipe, just a piece of wood, maybe 2 or 3 feet long. The way he stood there, with that thing in his hand, staring at me, not moving, it didn't feel random. It didn't feel like some guy just passing through or someone who got lost. He was standing too still, too aware. I slowly backed away from the window, not taking my eyes off him. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want to make any sudden movements. I kept thinking, what if he tries to come over here? What if he already did? What if he was the one who hit me? The window was locked. I hadn't done that. And I definitely hadn't gotten up in the middle of the night to close it. So who had? I crouched down, hoping he couldn't see me from that angle anymore. I stayed like that for maybe a full minute. When I finally worked up the nerve to look again, he was gone. Just gone. I scanned the yard, the sidewalk, even up and down the street. Nothing. Not a shadow, not a noise, not a trace. It was like he had vanished into thin air. I waited a while longer, watching, listening. Nothing happened. Eventually, I went and checked the doors. All were locked. I walked through the whole house, turning on lights, checking every window. Everything seemed fine, but it didn't feel fine. My skin was crawling. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something had happened. Someone had been here. I ended up staying up the rest of the night, just sitting on my bed, occasionally glancing out the window. I didn't open it again. I didn't want to. Morning couldn't come fast enough. The silence in the house was so loud it made my head feel like it was buzzing. Every creak of the walls, every gust of wind outside made me twitch. When the sun finally came up and the light started pouring into my room, I felt a tiny bit of relief. Enough to get me moving. I went outside to check the area beneath my window. There's no ladder, no crates, nothing to climb on, just hard ground and a bare wall. And yet the window had definitely been closed and latched. I know I didn't do that. I walked over to my neighbor's yard, just to check if maybe something had fallen, or if there were footprints or anything. Their grass was wet with morning dew, so any fresh steps would have shown up easily. I didn't see anything clear, but around the side of their house, right near the fence that divides our yards, there were some flattened patches of grass. Like someone had stood there for a while, shifting their weight. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, especially since I didn't have proof. What was I going to say? I think someone hit me and stared at me with a wooden plank last night. It sounds insane, even to me. And yet I know what I felt. I know what I saw. The rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept checking over my shoulder, looking out windows. I even caught myself jumping at random noises in the house. I don't usually get paranoid like that, but it stuck with me. That night, I didn't open the window. I couldn't. I kept it locked and closed the curtains. I shoved my dresser in front of the window too. It felt stupid, childish even, but I didn't care. I just wanted to feel safe. I didn't sleep much, but nothing happened. No noises, no figures in the yard, no feeling of someone standing over me. Just quiet, stillness, the way it should have been the night before. I don't know who that man was. I don't know how he got the window closed, or if he was already inside my room somehow. I don't even know if the hit I felt was real, or some freak muscle spasm in my sleep. But the look of that man, the stillness, the way he stared, the board in his hand, that was real. As real as the silence afterward, as real as the cold sweat I broke into. as real as the way my heart wouldn't slow down. I don't think I'll ever sleep with the window open again. I remember the moment I decided to go on that solo camping trip like it was yesterday. It was the kind of decision I made on impulse, like so many others that involve the outdoors. I had been itching for some time to escape the noise of everyday life and recharge. The weather had been perfect, clear skies and cool nights, which made it a perfect weekend to head into the valley for some solitude. I didn't have a lot of plans other than to hike the trails, sleep under the stars, and enjoy the peace of being out there. The spot I found was just outside of a small town, a remote valley tucked away enough to be quiet, but close enough to civilization that I wouldn't feel too isolated if something went wrong. There wasn't any cell service, though, which made it feel even more remote. I set out on a trail late in the afternoon, just before the sun started dipping below the horizon. The air was crisp, the trees dense and lush, and the ground soft underfoot. I figured I could take a few hours and stretch my legs before it got too dark. The sound of birds and the rustling of leaves filled the air, and I felt a certain peace out there, something I hadn't felt in a long time. There was no rushing, no deadlines, just the slow pace of nature. I didn't expect to run into anyone, so it was a bit of a surprise when I saw a man walking along the trail as I was making my way back. He wasn't too far off, just ahead of me. I noticed that he was dressed in worn-out clothes, had a scruffy beard, and looked like he'd spent more time in the woods than in town. Despite that, he gave me a friendly wave and stopped to chat. At first, I figured he was just a local guy, maybe another camper or hiker. We exchanged pleasantries, and I mentioned I was looking for a spot to camp for the night. Without hesitation, he suggested a place nearby, a spot he said was perfect for camping. He described it as being right by the river, hidden away enough that you wouldn't get bothered, but still close to the road. It sounded exactly like what I was looking for, so I thanked him and decided to follow his directions. We parted ways, and I found the spot easily enough. It was tucked away in a small clearing by the river, surrounded by trees. The spot was well camouflaged, so unless you knew where to look, it would be hard to find. I set up a small fire and cracked open a beer. As the evening settled in, I opened up my phone to listen to a comedy podcast from a friend of mine. It made me feel more at home, like I wasn't so far from everything. I could hear my laughter echoing through the trees, mixing with the crackling of the fire. The only thing that made it feel different from a night at home was the solitude. I felt a little off when I realized how visible I probably was, sitting around the fire with a bright, orange glow lighting up the trees. But I didn't worry too much. I was in the middle of nowhere. No one would be around, or so I thought. As the night went on, I decided to sleep in the back of my truck, tucked under my camper shell. The truck bed was packed with gear, and I figured it would be more comfortable than setting up a tent. The topper kept the rain out, and I could stretch out without worrying about wind or bugs. I shut my eyes, but I didn't fall asleep immediately. The sounds of the forest, wind rustling through the trees, occasional animal calls, and the far-off rush of the river, kept my mind wandering, but eventually exhaustion took over, and I drifted off. Morning came, and I woke up to the sound of birds calling to each other. The air was cold, but not freezing. The smell of the campfire from last night still hung in the air. I stretched, got out of my truck, and got to work. I started the fire up again, making a small breakfast of eggs and bacon. I cracked open a beer, not caring that it was barely 9 a.m. It was a lazy morning, just the kind I had been hoping for. That's when I saw him. At the edge of my camp, there was a figure standing. At first, I thought it was a tree or something I had missed when I first woke up, but as I looked closer, I saw a man. He was standing still, barely moving, and he was staring at the ground. I felt my stomach knot. He didn't seem to notice me or care that I was there. I glanced over at him again, my eyes scanning his appearance. The man looked rough. His clothes were torn and filthy, and his beard was long and matted. But the strangest thing about him were the dozens of plastic grocery bags tied all over his clothes. They hung from his jacket, his pants, his arms, like some kind of bizarre costume. There was something unsettling about it, the way the bags fluttered in the wind like they were alive. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, but not in the way you'd expect someone to. He was staring through me, not at me. It made my skin crawl. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. I didn't know if I should call out to him or just ignore it, but I didn't want to seem like I was panicking or being rude. so I decided to speak up, something casual. "Nice day, huh?" I said, trying to break the silence. There was no response. He didn't even glance in my direction. He just kept staring at the ground, shuffling slightly, as if he was pacing. I felt an uncomfortable wave of tension rise in me, but I didn't want to show it. I took a deep breath and tried again. "Hey, I've got some food cooking. Want some breakfast?" Still no answer. No acknowledgement whatsoever. He was just moving around the edge of my camp, still staring at the ground, pacing in slow, measured steps. It was like he was trying to figure something out, or like he didn't care if I was there at all. I felt a sharp sense of unease. I decided to take a different approach. "I've got a beer if you want one," I called out. It was a stupid thing to offer, but I didn't know what else to say. He didn't even flinch at the offer. Just kept walking, dragging his feet through the dirt, the plastic bags rustling softly with each step. At this point, I was getting more and more uncomfortable. My hand brushed over the bear spray that I kept close, just in case. I never thought I'd have to use it, but something about this guy was making my instincts scream. "Look, man," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Either you acknowledge me or you leave. I'm not playing this game." He didn't turn to look at me. He didn't even slow down. He just kept walking in circles, around the perimeter of my camp, like he was measuring something. He was so silent that it felt like the air had gone still. The only sounds were the rustling of the bags and the faint crunch of dirt under his boots. A knot tightened in my chest. I grabbed the bear spray, my fingers wrapping around the canister. I took a few steps forward, getting closer to him, not knowing what he might do next. My heart was pounding in my chest, and the adrenaline was starting to kick in. I couldn't stay calm anymore. "Get the hell out of here," I said, more forceful now. He didn't respond, just turned his back to me and kept walking. I could feel my pulse in my neck as I took another step forward, my grip tightening on the bear spray. I didn't want to use it, but I wasn't going to stand there and wait for him to do something crazy. My instincts told me that something was wrong with this guy. I took a deep breath, then shouted, "You need to leave now." The man slowly turned around, not looking at me, but just slowly turning, as if he was trying to make a decision. I didn't wait any longer. I pressed the button on the bear spray and aimed it directly at him. He didn't even flinch. He just turned around and walked away. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation I was expecting, but something about the way he moved, slow and deliberate, made my blood run cold. I stood there for a few moments, just staring at him as he wandered off. I felt a rush of relief, but also confusion. What was this guy's deal? Why didn't he speak? Why was he acting so strange? Without a second thought, I grabbed my gear, tossed it in the back of my truck, and slammed the tailgate shut. I was done. I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been watching me through the night, waiting for me to let my guard down. I didn't want to stick around and find out what his intentions were. I pulled away quickly, my tires crunching on the gravel as I sped down the road, leaving the valley behind. My heart was still racing, my thoughts swirling. I felt both embarrassed and relieved, grateful for my laziness in choosing to sleep in my truck instead of setting up a tent. Who knows what might have happened if I'd been in the tent, out in the open. I didn't stop until I hit the nearest town. I pulled into a gas station, my hands still shaking as I filled the tank. The sun was high now, and the valley felt like a distant, forgotten place. I didn't even want to think about it anymore. I never went back to that spot, and I don't think I ever will. Something about that man, the way he moved, the way he didn't respond, stuck with me. It was like he was trying to make me feel small, like he was waiting for something I couldn't see. I moved into the apartment in 2002. It was old, built in 1900, which meant by the time I got there, it had been standing for just over a century. The place had character, but it also had a vibe, one that I couldn't really shake off, especially as I started spending more time there. The living room and kitchen were fine, mostly just standard apartment stuff. No real surprises in those rooms. But the bedroom, the bathroom, that was where the discomfort crept in. The first thing I noticed was the way the bedroom felt, like it was always a little too cold or a little too still. It didn't help that the closet door, if left open, seemed to draw my attention. I never liked it open. It was like something about the dark space behind the door felt wrong, even though I couldn't explain why. And when I say wrong, I don't mean it in the way people usually do when they're scared of creepy places. It was more like I couldn't get comfortable in that room, especially if the closet door was ajar. I found myself pulling it shut instinctively, like I had to. At first, the unsettling feeling was just that, an uneasiness that stuck with me. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was enough to make me hesitate when I'd go into the bathroom or walk past the bedroom door at night. When I'd walk into the kitchen, I'd get the strange feeling of being watched, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And it wasn't like I was always on edge. It was subtle, creeping in when I was alone or when the apartment was too quiet. The worst part, though, was the night the banging happened. I'd been asleep, dead to the world, when something loud, *bang*, hit my door. My heart raced as I woke up, disoriented, trying to figure out what had just happened. My eyes shot open in the pitch-black room, and for a moment, I couldn't move, frozen in my bed. I could feel the cold air against my skin, but there was a weight in the room, something oppressive, pressing down on me. Then the bang came again, louder this time, followed by silence. It felt like the sound came from just outside my door, and it was like whoever, or whatever, was out there wanting me to hear it. It wasn't random, it wasn't a knock. It was deliberate. I had to force myself to get up. I wanted to stay under the covers, pretend like I hadn't heard anything, but I knew that wasn't an option. The apartment was old. Maybe the building was settling. Maybe it was just a random noise. I told myself that, but the fear didn't go away. I pulled myself out of bed and went to the door. The chain was still secured, and nothing seemed out of place. I checked every window, making sure they were all locked, just like they'd been when I went to bed. There was nothing, but the feeling didn't leave me, and it never did after that night. Something about it felt wrong, like I'd missed something, but I couldn't figure out what. After the banging incident, I thought it would just be a one-off, a weird event that had no real explanation. But then things started happening more frequently. It was small stuff at first, a cold draft in the bathroom that never seemed to make sense, like the windows were open, even though they weren't. But it escalated. One night, I woke up in the dark, paralyzed. It wasn't like the first time, where I heard a bang and could move around. This time, there was pressure on me, something I couldn't see but could feel, like hands on my chest, holding me down. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My heart started pounding in my chest, and all I could do was stare at the darkness. I couldn't make sense of it. I kept telling myself it was just a bad dream, but it didn't feel like a dream. When I finally managed to turn on the bedside lamp, the room was empty. Nothing had changed. There was no one there, no explanation for the feeling of pressure or the paralysis I'd experienced. I just sat there in bed, shaking and staring at the walls, trying to convince myself that nothing had happened. But deep down, I knew something had. I couldn't go back to sleep after that. I didn't feel safe in the dark anymore. I always kept a lamp on, no matter how tired I was. The light helped, but it didn't make the feeling go away. Every night, I would lay there, feeling like I was being watched. I could never shake the sense that I wasn't alone. It got so bad that I couldn't even go into the bathroom without feeling like I was being watched, like something was standing just behind the door, waiting for me to turn around. And I wasn't the only one who felt it. A few of my friends came over once, and even they said something about the bathroom, about how uncomfortable it made them feel, how the air felt heavier. That comment stuck with me, because it wasn't just me. They couldn't explain it either, but they felt it too. After a while, I started avoiding the closet in the bedroom altogether. I didn't want to go near it, didn't want to look inside. For some reason, my mind kept thinking of gasping noises, like someone struggling to breathe, whenever I thought about the closet. So I kept the door shut. I never opened it, not once. And yet, that unease didn't lessen. When the chance came to move to another unit in the building, I jumped at it. I packed up everything I could and left. The apartment had made me so uneasy that I didn't care about the rent or the hassle of moving. I just needed out. The new place was fine. It wasn't anything special, but it didn't feel like I was constantly being watched, and I was able to sleep again. I never heard much about the apartment after I moved out, except for occasional whispers from the building manager. People came and went in that unit, renting it for a few months before they too moved out. I always thought it was strange, but I never said anything to anyone. I didn't want to sound crazy. Then one day, I ran into the building manager while he was painting the walls of that same apartment. He looked up at me and smiled, like we were old friends, and invited me in to see the renovations. The place looked nicer than I remembered, the walls freshly painted and the floors shiny. It didn't feel as cold or unsettling as it had when I lived there, but something about it still didn't sit right with me. We got to talking, and it was then that the building owner, who was there doing some work, casually mentioned a piece of the apartment's history that I never knew. He just threw it out there, like it was nothing, that a former tenant had died in that very room. He mentioned that the tenant had committed suicide, hanging themselves in the closet. It was a shock, but it wasn't what unsettled me the most. The owner went on to mention that the original designer of the building had also lived in the apartment and had died there 2 years earlier. It wasn't the first time I'd heard rumors about deaths in the building, but hearing it from the building owner felt different. I wasn't angry or upset when I heard this. It wasn't like I was looking for someone to blame, but I did feel a sense of validation. All those times I felt like I was being watched, all those nights I couldn't shake the feeling of something being wrong. It wasn't just my imagination. There was something about that place, something that I couldn't explain or understand at the time. I had lived in that apartment for over a year, and now I knew that it wasn't just me. Something had happened there, and it lingered, even if no one else could see it. I still think about it sometimes, that apartment. I don't know if it was the old age of the building, the strange history, or just my mind playing tricks on me, but I'll never forget how I felt living there. I still can't stand the thought of sleeping in the dark without a light on, even now. It's strange how certain places can make you feel things you can't explain, and I don't think I'll ever fully understand what happened in that apartment. But one thing's for sure, I'm never going back to that place. I remember it so clearly, the hot, sticky night, the unfamiliar sounds of Mexico, and the fear that gripped me as I woke up from a nightmare. My brother and I had gone to visit our grandparents in their small, old house in a rural area, far from the city lights and noise. The house was simple, with creaky wooden floors, a tin roof that rattled when the wind blew, and a kitchen that always smelled of spices and cooked meat. It was a place I wasn't used to, but I had been looking forward to the trip. My grandparents were kind, and it was always fun spending time with them. However, that night changed everything. I was about 10 years old, and my brother, who was a few years older, was sleeping in the same room as me. The room was small, with 2 beds, an old wooden wardrobe, and a small window that let in a bit of moonlight. The air was thick with humidity, and despite the fan blowing above us, it didn't help much. I remember being restless, tossing and turning under the heavy blankets, trying to shake off the feeling that something wasn't quite right. I had been dreaming of a dark figure chasing me through the dusty streets of the town, but the more I ran, the more it seemed to get closer. I could hear its footsteps, always just behind me, breathing heavily as if it were laughing. Then suddenly I woke up, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest, the weight of the nightmare still heavy on me. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the feeling, but something felt off. It wasn't just the lingering terror from my dream. It was the stillness in the room. It felt too quiet, almost too oppressive. I glanced over at my brother's bed, expecting to see him sleeping soundly, but to my surprise, his bed was empty. His blanket was thrown off, and there was no sign of him at all. The moonlight filtered through the small window, casting long shadows on the walls, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I sat up, my heart rate picking up again, scanning the dark room. That's when I saw it, a figure. It was short, barely more than a shadow, but I could clearly make out the long, dark hair that cascaded down its back. It moved quickly, darting across the doorway like it was trying to hide. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I just froze, unsure of what I had seen. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but nothing made sense. There was no one in the house except for my grandparents, my brother, and me. But there was something about the figure, the way it moved so quietly, as if it was trying not to be seen, that terrified me. I was frozen in place, my mind screaming at me to run, to get out of that room, but my body wouldn't move. The sweat on my forehead felt cold now, and my hands shook as I pulled the covers tighter around me, hoping whatever it was wouldn't notice me. But as the seconds passed, it felt like hours. The figure had disappeared, but I couldn't shake the image from my mind. My heart pounded in my chest, and I tried to tell myself it was just a trick of the light, or maybe my imagination running wild after the nightmare. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Just as I was about to bolt out of bed and leave the room, I heard the door creak open. My grandmother walked in, her presence suddenly calming the frantic thoughts in my mind. She didn't seem surprised or worried, just the same calm, steady grandmother who always knew what to say. She looked at me for a moment, her wrinkled face soft and gentle, and said, "Go back to sleep, Mijita. It's just a bad dream." But I couldn't. I couldn't shake the image of that figure, and the thought of being left alone in the room made me even more afraid. Still, I stayed silent, too scared to argue. My grandmother left the room, and I was alone again, but I didn't feel any safer. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the shadows in the corners of the room, listening for any sound that might confirm my worst fear. But the room remained still, and eventually exhaustion took over. I finally managed to fall back into a fitful sleep, but the fear never fully left me. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and tortillas wafting from the kitchen. I stumbled out of bed, still feeling groggy and unsettled, but the normalcy of the morning routine helped calm my nerves. My brother was sitting at the kitchen table, eating breakfast with my grandparents. He seemed fine, like nothing had happened, but there was a nervous energy about him that I couldn't quite place. As we sat down to eat, I asked him where he had gone last night. He looked at me, his eyes wide with confusion. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I was in bed the whole time. I don't know what you're talking about." I hesitated, unsure of what to say. I didn't want to sound crazy, but something told me he wasn't telling the truth. I told him about the nightmare, the figure in the doorway, and how I had woken up to find him gone. He just stared at me, then shook his head as if trying to brush it off. But I could tell something was wrong. He wasn't acting like himself, and there was a nervous tension in the air. It wasn't until later that morning, when my grandfather came out to the yard with a serious look on his face, that I learned the truth. He was holding a shotgun, the barrel gleaming in the bright sunlight. My heart skipped a beat when I saw him, and I had a bad feeling that something wasn't right. "Last night," he said, his voice low and gruff, "I heard something strange. I heard someone calling my name. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it again, clearer this time. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, so I grabbed my gun and went outside to check. By the time I got to the backyard, I didn't see anyone, but I heard footsteps, like someone was moving around in the dark." My brother's face turned pale as he listened, his eyes wide in disbelief. My grandfather continued, his voice steady but tense. "I didn't want to take any chances, so I fired a shot into the air. That's when I heard your brother running back inside the house. I think he must have gotten scared by the sound of the gunshot. I felt a chill run down my spine as the pieces of the night finally clicked together. My brother had run out of the room because of the gunshot, thinking there was an intruder or something else out there. It explained why he was so freaked out, but it didn't explain the figure I had seen. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the figure might not have been a person at all. It could have been a shadow cast by the trees outside, or perhaps it was just my mind playing tricks on me in the dark, amplified by the fear from my nightmare. The rest of the day passed quietly, but the unease lingered. My brother and I spent the afternoon outside, playing in the sun to shake off the tension of the night before. I couldn't help but keep an eye on the shadows, and every now and then, I would glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure again. But nothing happened. As the sun set and the evening drew near, I felt a sense of relief. The fear that had gripped me the night before seemed to fade with the daylight, and the house felt like a safe place once more. We had dinner with my grandparents, and everything felt normal again, though the memory of the nightmare and the figure in the doorway stayed with me for a long time. In the end, I never figured out what exactly happened that night. Maybe it was just a mix of fear, imagination, and the strange surroundings that caused my mind to play tricks on me. But one thing was clear. My brother's scare, my grandfather's gunshot, and the strange events of that night were all connected in some way. Looking back, I realized that sometimes fear doesn't come from the things you can see. It comes from the things you can't explain. And sometimes the most terrifying thing of all is the unknown. I've always been the kind of person who brushes off the strange and unexplainable, chalking it up to my overactive imagination or just coincidence. But there's one experience from my college days that I still can't quite shake, no matter how much I try to rationalize it. It was my junior year of college, and I had moved into an old duplex with 3 friends. The house was in a pretty nice neighborhood, nestled between a few other old houses that had that charm, but also that eerie lived-in feel. The kind of place that had probably seen its fair share of history, creaky floors, drafty windows, and the occasional inexplicable oddity. Nothing that made you immediately think this place is haunted, but enough to make you wonder if something had happened here that had left a mark. We didn't care, though. It was a place to live, and honestly, the rent was cheap, so we were fine with it. No one had warned us about anything weird going on. It was around 2 a.m. one night when it all started. I had been sitting at my desk, hunched over my laptop, working on a project for school. I had lost track of time, as usual, and before I knew it, I was starving. My stomach was growling, and I figured I'd make a quick snack to power through the night. I grabbed a couple of frozen chicken breasts and tossed them on the George Foreman grill, the sizzling sound filling the quiet house. The kitchen was small, just a countertop with a few cabinets and a sink, and across from me, the stairs to the second floor led up from the living room. There was a doorway just a few feet away from where I was standing, opening up to the stairs. The house was old, and the walls were thin, so if someone was coming downstairs, you could usually hear it. But tonight, it was quiet. I was alone in the kitchen, the hum of the grill the only sound. That's when I noticed something from the corner of my eye. It was just a brief movement, too quick to catch clearly, but I saw someone peek around the corner of the doorway leading up to the stairs. My heart didn't race at first, because it didn't seem strange. I had 3 roommates, and one of them was a notorious night owl, so it wouldn't have been unusual for him to be awake at this hour, coming down to grab something from the kitchen. I thought, it's probably just him. I turned my head, ready to say something like, "You want some food?" But as soon as I looked up, the figure was gone. Completely. I stared at the empty doorway, waiting for a second or two, but nothing. No footsteps, no rustling. Nothing. My heart started to beat a little faster, and I looked up the stairs. Nothing. The house was dead quiet. I shook it off. It was probably just a trick of the light, I thought. Maybe I had just imagined it, but there was something about it that unsettled me. I stood there for a moment, trying to convince myself that I was being ridiculous. My food was almost done anyway, so I turned my attention back to the grill. But as I was about to flip the chicken, I saw it again. A man walking toward the front door. He was bald, a little heavier set, and wearing a white tank top, the kind of person you'd barely notice in a crowd. He didn't look familiar, and he wasn't moving like someone who was just passing through. It was like he was headed for the door, about to leave. At that moment, my stomach dropped. There was no way someone should be in the house at this time, especially not someone I didn't recognize. I froze for a second, then quickly turned off the grill, grabbed my phone from the counter, and bolted upstairs. I slammed my bedroom door shut, locking it behind me, my heart pounding in my chest. I texted my roommates, but no one responded. I lay there in the dark, trying to calm myself down, convincing myself that I had just imagined it, or that I had somehow misinterpreted what I had seen. But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't add up. Why would someone be in the house at 2 a.m. without any of us knowing? And why would they walk toward the front door like they were about to leave without making a sound? It didn't make sense. The next morning, I told my roommates about it. They all laughed it off at first, but my friend who lived downstairs, Mike, mentioned something strange that caught my attention. He said that almost every night, the doors leading to the basement and his closet would open on their own. He'd lock them up, but the next morning, they'd be wide open again. It was as if someone, or something, was messing with them. He didn't seem too bothered by it, but I could tell there was something about the way he talked that made me wonder if he wasn't just brushing it off to avoid scaring us. A couple of days later, we got a bit of a wild idea. We decided to try using a Ouija board. I know, it sounds crazy, but we were young, and it seemed like a fun way to mess around. We set it up in the living room, inviting a few people over for the session. We lit some candles, got comfortable, and started asking questions. We made contact with something. Or at least, that's what we thought. It spelled out its name, Liam. We asked it what it could see, and it said hat. That was it. We all shrugged it off, trying to act like it wasn't a big deal. But then, about 15 minutes after the session ended, I got a call from one of my friends who had just left. She sounded freaked out. "Hey, you're not going to believe this," she said, out of breath. "I left my hat on a chair in your living room, and now it's gone." I froze. We had just asked the Ouija board about a hat, and now my friend was calling to tell me that her hat had mysteriously disappeared. It wasn't possible for her to have forgotten it. We had all been sitting in the living room, and I watched her leave with her hat on the chair. But now it was gone. We all freaked out a little. It didn't help that we had asked about a hat, and now, just like that, it was gone. But things didn't stop there. Over the next couple of weeks, more strange stuff started happening. My friend who lived downstairs started noticing that his closet door, which he had bolted shut, would sometimes be open again. It wasn't just happening every so often, it was happening constantly. One day, we decided to ask around the neighborhood to see if anyone had any history on the house. A neighbor, an older guy who had lived in the area for decades, told us that the previous tenant, a man named Liam, had lived there for years before he moved away. He didn't go into too much detail, but it was enough to send chills down our spines. Apparently, this Liam was known for being a bit of a loner, a heavy-set guy who didn't leave much of an impression on anyone. We pieced things together. The bald, heavy-set man I saw walking toward the front door. Could that have been Liam? It made sense, but it didn't sit right with me. Why would a former tenant still be around, wandering the house in the middle of the night? And why had we never heard about him before? It felt like something was off, but we couldn't explain it. But it didn't end there. One afternoon, I was working on my old Macintosh laptop, trying to fix something with my wireless connection. I had this Cisco Aeronet 350 Wi-Fi card that I had to use because it was one of the few that worked with Macs back then. I opened up the Cisco utility to check the wireless networks, and for a split second, I saw something strange on the screen. Right above the list of SIDs, in bold black letters, the utility flashed BO. I blinked, thinking I was seeing things. But when I checked again, it was gone. It didn't make sense. There was no reason for it to show up, especially not in that context. The whole thing felt like a bad joke, but I didn't find it funny at all. It sent a chill through me. After that, we decided to move out. The strange happenings had escalated, and the atmosphere in the house had shifted. It wasn't just the weird noises or the odd occurrences. It was the feeling that something wasn't quite right, like we were living in a place where we didn't belong. We packed up our things and moved out as quickly as we could. I didn't feel like testing my luck anymore. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that house, but I know one thing for sure. Whatever it wasn't just my imagination. And I'll never forget the strange sense of unease that lingered long after we left. It was sometime in the fall of 1998. I was 18, fresh out of high school, still living at home, working part-time at a hardware store, and dating a girl from the next town over. I'd gotten to know her through some mutual friends earlier that summer, and even though the two towns weren't that far apart, the route between them felt like something out of nowhere. 10 or 15 miles of mostly empty road, bordered on both sides by woods that seemed to stretch on forever. The highway I had to take was one of those two-lane each-direction roads that ran straight through the middle of the trees like a crack down a pane of glass. No buildings, no houses, not even a gas station along that stretch. If you broke down out there, you were just stuck. No cell phones back then, not like today. I didn't even have a pager, and calling anyone meant finding the next town or business with a landline. That night I left my house just before dusk. The sky was that kind of deep orange you only get for 10 minutes, right before the sun drops away for good. I'd already showered, threw on some jeans and a flannel, and I was in my old '91 Mustang, the one I'd bought with money from a summer job and a loan from my dad. It wasn't perfect, but it could move. The exhaust had a low, loud hum to it that made the whole car vibrate a little when I stepped on it. There was barely any traffic when I pulled onto the highway. I had my window cracked to let in some of the cool air, and my headlights flipped on even though it wasn't completely dark yet. Just a habit. My mind was already halfway in the next town, thinking about the night ahead. We didn't have big plans, probably just hang out in her basement, maybe rent a movie or walk to the diner later. But it was something to look forward to. After about 5 miles, I noticed another vehicle on the road ahead. At first it was just a couple of red brake lights far in the distance, blinking in and out through the trees whenever the road curved. As I got closer, I saw it was one of those boxy delivery-style trucks, like what UPS or FedEx used, except this one was white and had some kind of company lettering along the side. Not a pickup. It was taller and squared off, with those wide swinging rear doors and no visible side doors. Just open gaps where the driver could hop in and out. It had a logo on the side that said something like Dale's Plumbing and Heating in blue stenciled letters. I remember it clearly because I stared at it a long time later. It was driving a little under the speed limit, not terribly slow, but enough that I eventually crept up behind it. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was just trying to get where I was going. I flipped my turn signal on, moved into the left lane, and passed him like I'd passed any number of cars before. I wasn't aggressive about it. No speeding, no cutting him off. I just got back into the right lane once I was a few car lengths ahead. Didn't even glance over when I passed. Maybe 10 seconds later, I caught movement in my rearview mirror. The truck had sped up and was coming up fast behind me. I remember the way the headlights bounced with the dips in the road, flaring in my mirrors, and then disappearing as he got right up on my bumper. For a second I thought maybe he was trying to signal me. Maybe I had a brake light out, or maybe something fell off the car and I hadn't noticed. But then he swerved left and pulled up beside me. That's when I saw him. The driver was leaning halfway out the open side of the truck, his face lit by my headlights and the last of the orange sky. He looked furious, eyes wide, jaw clenched, yelling something I couldn't hear over the sound of both engines. He wasn't just upset. He looked unhinged, like something had snapped in him. His face twisted in this kind of rage I didn't understand. His left hand gripped the steering wheel, and the right one was waving, jabbing toward me like he was telling me to pull over, or threatening me. I couldn't tell. I slowed down, thinking maybe I'd just let him go ahead and be done with it. But as I did, he matched my speed and moved closer, drifting into my lane until his truck nearly kissed the side of my car. I swerved a little toward the shoulder, and he snapped back over, accelerating just ahead of me, then cutting in front. Then he slammed on his brakes. I remember the way my stomach jumped as I slammed mine too, tires chirping on the pavement. My heart jumped up into my throat. We were still doing around 50 when he did that, and it was only because I reacted fast that I didn't plow right into the back of him. My tires screeched again as I fishtailed slightly, then regained control. I backed off, heart pounding, and tried to keep a few car lengths between us. I still didn't know what the hell he wanted. I was thinking maybe he was just road raging. Maybe he thought I'd cut him off or disrespected him somehow. I tried to slow more, thinking if I let him go far enough ahead, maybe he'd forget about it. But he didn't. He slowed with me. Every time I tried to back off, he adjusted. When I tried to speed up to create space, he hit the gas too. Then he started swerving again, snaking across both lanes like he was trying to keep me from passing. The road was still nearly empty. It was just us out there. My adrenaline was surging now. I was gripping the steering wheel tight, trying to decide what to do. I thought about pulling over, but knew I'd be completely alone out there. No streetlights, no traffic, no businesses for miles. I wasn't going to stop unless I absolutely had to. The next time he slowed suddenly, I saw my chance. I swerved hard into the left lane and dropped the hammer. My Mustang roared and the back tires bit into the road. I flew past him, engine howling, and didn't look back. I was pushing the speed limit now, pushing past it, really, 80, then 85. I knew the curves of the road, knew it straightened out for a while before the next overpass, and I leaned into it. I figured I could lose him. That truck wasn't built for speed. It looked old, slow, worn out. But when I checked my mirror a mile later, he was still there. Smaller now, but there. His headlights bobbed in the distance like the eyes of something chasing me. A slow but relentless kind of predator. I kept pushing. 90, then 95. The Mustang could do it, but my hands were slick with sweat, and I was starting to get tunnel vision. Everything outside the beam of my headlights was pure black. Trees and more trees, a blur of shadows on either side. I didn't even have music on. Just the engine, the road, and the sound of my breathing. I kept driving like that for a while. Long enough for the distance between us to grow. Long enough that eventually, when I looked back again, his headlights were gone. But I didn't slow down. Not until I saw the first signs of town. The glowing green sign for the exit, then the faint orange glow of distant streetlights on the horizon. I finally let up on the gas and coasted down to something closer to the speed limit, though my heart was still pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I pulled into my girlfriend's neighborhood, taking turns and side streets just to be safe. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see that truck again. It never came. When I got to her place, I parked in the driveway, shut the car off, and just sat there for a while. My hands were still shaking. I wiped the sweat off my forehead, off my neck, trying to pull myself back down to normal. I didn't want her or her parents to see me like that, shaking, white-faced, jumpy. Eventually I went inside and tried to pretend like everything was fine. We hung out like usual, watched some TV, talked, made plans for the weekend. But the whole time, I couldn't stop thinking about the guy in the truck. His face, the way he yelled at me like I'd done something to him. The way he chased me. The way he tried to block me in, run me off the road. It didn't feel like a normal road rage thing. It felt personal somehow, like he'd picked me specifically. I told her about it eventually, later that night when we were alone in her room. She was freaked out, of course. Told me to call the cops, but what could I tell them? I hadn't gotten the plate. I barely remembered the company name. The only thing I could recall was Dale's Plumbing and Heating, and that it was a white delivery-style truck. No witnesses. No damage to my car. Nothing solid. Still, the next day I looked up the company in the phone book and gave them a call. The guy who answered didn't sound like he had any idea what I was talking about. I explained what had happened, at least as much as I could, and he told me they didn't have any trucks out that night. Said all their drivers had clocked out hours before. I asked him if they had an older white truck, like the kind delivery companies use. He said yeah, they did have one like that, but it hadn't been used in weeks. I didn't know what to say after that. I just hung up. I never saw the truck again. Never heard anything about it. Never read about anything like it in the news. No reports of accidents or missing vehicles. Nothing. I kept taking that same highway for a while, but for a long time after that, I'd feel my chest tighten every time I saw another vehicle behind me, especially if it was a box truck. I started leaving earlier in the afternoon, so I didn't have to drive that stretch after dark. I started paying a lot more attention to who was around me on the road, memorizing license plates, watching mirrors. It was a long time before I stopped thinking about that guy. Even now, all these years later, I still remember his face, lit by the fading sunlight and the white of my headlights. That furious look in his eyes, like I'd taken something from him, like he wanted to hurt me, and I'll never know why. We had been going to that camp for years. It was a tradition. Every school year, our class would spend a few days out in the woods, learning survival skills, doing arts and crafts, and for some of us, trying to get through the whole thing without feeling homesick or missing out on what was going on at home. It was supposed to be just another one of those trips that blended together with the others, but this one was different. And it all started when I was in the bathroom. It wasn't anything strange, really. It was just a couple of us in the bathrooms after dinner, talking about whatever was going on. Elle and I had been walking around all afternoon, getting to know the campgrounds better, since we weren't familiar with the place that well. Our group had never been assigned to this building before, so we had a lot to say about the creaky floors and the old windows. Nothing major, just the usual stuff you notice when you're in a new place. We had just finished brushing our teeth when, in the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of white. My stomach did this weird thing where it flipped over, and I froze for a second. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at the doorway, where I thought I saw a little figure. A little girl in a white dress. It was like a flicker in my vision, but something about it stuck with me, and I couldn't shake it. I turned to Elle, who was still brushing her teeth, and said, "I think there's a little girl in a white dress here." She didn't even stop brushing. "Huh," she mumbled through her toothbrush. I think I saw a little girl, like, standing in the hallway. My voice sounded strange, even to me, like I was trying to convince myself more than anyone else. But I couldn't explain it. I just had this gut feeling, a chill that ran down my spine. Elle, still clueless, just shrugged. "Whatever, you're probably tired." She wiped her mouth, rinsed, and walked out of the bathroom, but I stayed behind, trying to shake the feeling off. Something didn't feel right. I tried to ignore it, but the thought of the little girl lingered. The next morning, as we were gathering on the lawn for the morning activities, I saw Em, one of my friends who wasn't particularly close to me, but was still in the group. She wasn't even in our room. She wasn't part of our bathroom talk. But as she marched across the grass toward me, she looked like she had something important to say. "There's a little girl in a white dress here," she said, walking up to me without a hint of hesitation. Her face was serious, like she was stating something obvious, not as if she had just been in the same bathroom where I had been the night before. My heart skipped a beat. Elle and I hadn't mentioned anything about the girl to anyone, and Em didn't even talk to Elle. The way she said it was too nonchalant, too confident. "How do you know that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level, but I could feel my palms getting sweaty. Em looked at me like I was being ridiculous. "I saw her. She's been around the place for a while now." She paused, glancing around like she was worried someone might overhear. "I've been seeing her since we got here." I didn't know how to respond to that. I couldn't exactly tell her I had the same feeling without sounding crazy. Instead, I just nodded, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck rise. We spent the day doing camp activities, hiking, learning to start fires, and trying to not think about what had happened the night before. But the feeling of something watching us was constant. I couldn't shake it, and whenever I looked around, it was like I kept seeing flashes of something, a small figure moving quickly just out of sight. It was during the afternoon, when we had some free time, that Em and I decided to investigate. She had mentioned earlier that she could see ghosts, at least that's how she put it, and that she had special gifts for sensing things others couldn't. I wasn't sure how much of it I believed, but now I was starting to wonder. I didn't see things, but I could feel them. And right now I could feel something wrong. Em said she'd been talking to the little girl, trying to figure out why she was here. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I agreed to walk with her. I didn't want to be alone anymore, and the air felt thick, like the whole place was holding its breath. We walked around the campgrounds, heading toward the woods where Em said she had seen the girl. The closer we got to the edge of the forest, the more intense the feeling became. My heart beat harder, and my hands were clammy. It felt like something was watching us from the trees, and I couldn't shake the thought that we were being followed. Em stopped, squinting into the woods. "I think she's over there," she said softly, pointing toward a group of trees at the edge of the clearing. I could feel it too, a heaviness in the air, a pull, like something was waiting for us. "I don't think we should go any closer," I said, my voice tight. I didn't want to sound scared, but I felt this undeniable urge to get away. The bad feeling in my chest was growing stronger. But Em shook her head. "I'm going to talk to her." "No," I said, my voice shaking a little. "We need to stop this. Just leave her alone." I didn't know why I was so certain, but I felt like something awful was going to happen if we didn't. Em hesitated, looking down at the ground for a moment, then back at me. She gave a little shrug, like it didn't matter either way. But she didn't stop talking to the girl. I could hear her muttering something, and it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up even more. Then I heard it, the sudden shift in the air. A cold breeze rushed past us, and it felt like the temperature had dropped several degrees. Em's voice faltered for a second. She's not happy," she whispered, and I felt a knot twist in my stomach. I grabbed Em's arm, pulling her away. "We need to go. Now." But as we turned to leave, the sense of something following us intensified. I could hear footsteps behind us, but when I turned around, there was nothing there. I didn't look back again. I just kept moving. Later that night, when we were sitting in the main lodge, one of the camp counselors, a man who had always been friendly with us, called Em and me over to talk. He had this concerned look on his face, and I could tell he was trying to keep things calm. "Listen, I don't know what's going on, but you two need to stop all this nonsense," he said, his tone a little harsh. "You're scaring the other kids, and we're trying to keep things under control. This isn't funny." I looked over at Em, who was standing next to me. The bad feeling hit me like a truck. My whole body tensed, and I knew, without a doubt, that the little girl was here. I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to let the counselor know how bad it was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. I turned to Em, not saying anything, but when I looked at her, she was pale. Her eyes were wide with fear. "She's here," Em mouthed, her lips barely moving. Her face was frozen in a look of terror. I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't know what to do. The counselor was still talking, but I couldn't hear him anymore. The buzzing in my ears drowned out everything around me. I had to leave. I had to get away from this place. That night, I barely slept. I kept seeing flashes of that little girl in my mind, her white dress glowing faintly in the dark. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside our room, but every time I looked, no one was there. The next morning, we packed our things quickly. There was no way I was staying one more minute at that camp. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I had to leave. I wasn't going to be anywhere near that place when it was dark again. As we drove away, I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but I knew one thing for sure. I had felt something real. And whatever it wasn't done with us. When I think back on that trip, it's not the campfires or the hiking trails that stick with me. It's that girl in the white dress, and the feeling of something I couldn't see, but knew was there, watching, waiting, and I have a feeling we hadn't seen the last of her. That night is one I can never forget. I was 16 at the time, and I had just gone through a brutal fight with my mom. We didn't see eye to eye on anything, and that night, her words cut deeper than usual. I couldn't stand it. I needed to get away, so I grabbed my things and headed to my grandpa's house, the only place I knew I could find some peace. I arrived there around 9 p.m. My grandpa greeted me like he always did, with a big smile and a warm hug. I felt safe there, even though I was a mess. I had cried the whole drive over. I wasn't sure if it was from the fight with my mom or the general weight of the world that had been building up. Maybe it was both. Whatever it was, I felt like I couldn't hold it in anymore. My grandpa sat me down, and I bawled my eyes out for what felt like hours, telling him everything that had been eating me alive. Eventually, after what seemed like an eternity of me sobbing into his old, weathered flannel shirt, my grandpa gently told me that I needed to get some sleep. "You'll feel better after some rest, kiddo," he said in that soothing, deep voice of his. He always knew how to calm me down, even when I felt like my life was falling apart. I wiped my face, sniffling, and he walked me to the spare room where I always stayed when I visited. It was a small room, but it was mine when I came here. It had a simple bed, an old wooden dresser, and a couple of shelves lined with books and knickknacks my grandpa had collected over the years. The curtains were thick, blocking out the outside world, and the window was always closed at night, giving the room a cozy feel. I lay down, still feeling the lingering weight of everything that had happened. The migraine that had been gnawing at me for hours finally hit full force. My head felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. My stomach churned, and all I could do was curl up under the covers, trying to ignore the pain. It didn't take long for exhaustion to take over. My body ached, and the steady rhythm of my breath gradually slowed until I finally drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. But it didn't last long. I woke up a short while later, and when I opened my eyes, everything seemed off. My grandpa must have come in and closed my window and curtains, tucked me in, and shut the door. I knew he always did that when he checked in on me, so I didn't think much of it at first. But as I lay there, staring at the dark room around me, something felt wrong. I couldn't see anything. The light that had been coming from outside through the curtains had vanished, and the room was pitch black. I tried to reach over and turn on my bedside lamp, but the knob on the lamp wouldn't turn. It just spun in my fingers, no matter how much I tried. Panic crept up my spine. I started to feel like I wasn't alone. It was subtle at first, just a sensation at the edge of my awareness. But then it grew, like something thick and suffocating was slowly wrapping itself around me. The darkness seemed to press in on all sides. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was like the darkness itself was alive, breathing, closing in. I tried to call out for my grandpa, but the sound that came out of my mouth was weak, barely a whimper. My heart pounded so loudly in my chest that it felt like it might burst. My body went cold with fear as the room seemed to get even darker, if that was possible. I could feel the air in the room shift, like something was moving in the space with me. Then I heard it. A soft sound at first, almost too faint to make out. But as the seconds ticked by, it became clearer, the sound of something slithering across the floor. It wasn't the sound of footsteps, but something worse. Something dragging, scraping, moving across the ground. I felt it move under my bed, and I froze. My breath hitched in my throat, and I tried to scream, to call out again for my grandpa. But all that came out was a breathless gasp. I could hear my heart beating in my ears, drowning out everything else. The slithering sound moved closer to me, and I could almost feel whatever it was inches away from my legs. I could feel the weight of the room pressing down on me. I didn't know what was happening, but I couldn't stay in that bed any longer. I needed to get out of there. With shaking hands, I threw off the covers and tried to scramble out of the bed. I landed hard on the floor, my legs weak and unsteady, and I pushed myself up, stumbling toward the door. I reached for the door handle, my hands trembling, but it wouldn't turn. It was locked. I tried again, desperately pulling and twisting the knob with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. The darkness behind me felt like it was closing in, suffocating me, and I could feel something moving behind me, coming closer. Tears streamed down my face as I screamed, but nothing came. My voice was lost in the thick air around me. I kicked the door, pounded on it with my fists, crying out for my grandpa. The room felt smaller, and I felt smaller, trapped in a space that was closing in on me, threatening to swallow me whole. Then, just as my panic reached its peak, the door creaked. It didn't open immediately, but it unlocked. I burst through it, stumbling into the hallway, and the second I stepped out of that room, the pressure lifted. The air was thinner, and I could breathe again, but the fear still clawed at me. I didn't think. I ran. I didn't care where I was going, just as long as it was away from that room. I dashed down the hallway toward the bathroom, and I slammed the door behind me, locking it just in case. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely twist the light switch, but when I finally did, nothing happened. The room remained just as dark. I turned around slowly, dreading what I would see, but knowing that I had to look. And there it was, my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I was pale, my eyes wide with fear, but the worst part wasn't my face. It was the shadows behind me in the mirror, stretching and twisting like they were alive. I knew they weren't part of the reflection, but they were there lingering, moving in a way that no shadow should. I reached for the door handle, ready to run again, but then everything went black. I woke up in the same room. The curtains were closed, the window shut. My door was closed, just like before. My heart raced in my chest, and I felt the cold sweat on my skin. I sat up quickly, my breath coming in short gasps, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I reached for the lamp again, my hand trembling. The knob turned this time, but only halfway before it just spun. It wouldn't click on. I froze, the memories of what I had just experienced crashing over me. My mind struggling to piece together what was real and what wasn't. Had it been a dream? It had felt so real. Too real. I glanced toward the window. The darkness was still there, suffocating, but now I was awake. Now I was aware. And somehow, that made it worse. The room felt too quiet, too still, like it was waiting for something. I didn't know if it was a dream or something else, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Not in that room. I had to get out. I left school at 4:15 p.m., as I always did. My professor, a meticulous Korean man, adhered strictly to his schedule, ensuring our class ended precisely on time. The routine was comforting in its predictability. After gathering my belongings, I began the familiar 10-minute walk to my car, parked in the student lot a short distance from the main building. The campus was alive with the usual post-class bustle. Students chatting, some hurrying to their next commitments, others lingering to discuss lectures. The early evening air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass mixed with the faint aroma of coffee from a nearby cafe. I navigated through the throng of students, the rhythmic tapping of my shoes against the pavement syncing with the ambient sounds of campus life. Reaching my car, I unlocked it, slid into the driver's seat, and tossed my backpack onto the passenger side. The familiar scent of the car's interior greeted me, a mix of old leather and the lingering traces of the air freshener I'd hung months ago. Starting the engine, I glanced at the dashboard clock, 4:25 p.m., right on schedule. My job was an hour's drive away, and I was accustomed to this routine. The drive, though lengthy, provided a buffer between the academic rigor of school and the responsibilities awaiting me at work. It was a time to decompress, to transition mentally from one role to another. Merging onto the highway, I settled into the drive. The traffic was moderate, the sun beginning its descent, casting elongated shadows across the asphalt. The rhythmic hum of tires on the road, the occasional whoosh of cars overtaking me, and the distant murmur of the radio created a soothing backdrop. I often found these drives meditative, a time to reflect or let my mind wander. As I drove, familiar landmarks passed by, the old gas station with its retro signage, the sprawling oak tree that stood solitary in a field, the cluster of billboards advertising everything from legal services to the latest fast food deals. Each marker was a testament to the miles ticking away, bringing me closer to my destination. Upon arriving at work, I parked in my usual spot and grabbed my backpack. Entering the building, the cool blast of air conditioning was a welcome contrast to the warmth outside. The receptionist looked up, a hint of surprise flashing across her face. "You're early," she remarked. I frowned, puzzled by her comment. "Really?" I replied, glancing at the wall clock. It read 4:50 p.m. confused. I pulled out my phone to double-check. The screen confirmed the time, 4:50 p.m. A wave of bewilderment washed over me. The drive had felt like the usual hour-long journey, yet here I was a full 30 minutes ahead of schedule. Dismissing the receptionist's curious glance, I made my way to the break room, seeking a moment to collect my thoughts. Sitting down, I tried to piece together the anomaly. Had my professor dismissed us earlier than usual? That seemed unlikely, given his strict adherence to the timetable. To verify, I scrolled through my recent text messages. The last one I'd sent before leaving campus was time-stamped at 4:22 p.m., aligning with the usual class dismissal time. I then considered the drive itself. Had I driven faster than normal? Reflecting on the journey, I recalled maintaining my typical speed, adhering to traffic laws, and even encountering the usual slowdowns near construction zones. A quick check of my car's fuel consumption showed it was consistent with an hour-long drive, further deepening the mystery. The realization unsettled me. Time, a constant and unwavering force, seemed to have bent in my favor, delivering me to work with an inexplicable promptness. The rational part of my mind sought explanations, perhaps a misreading of the clocks, a lapse in memory, or an unnoticed shortcut. Yet, none of these theories held up under scrutiny. Over the next few days, the incident lingered in my thoughts. I casually inquired with classmates about the previous session, subtly probing to see if anyone else had noticed an early dismissal. Each response was the same. Class had ended at its usual time. Seeking solace in routine, I paid closer attention to my subsequent drives, noting departure and arrival times, monitoring my speed, and even using a GPS app to track the journey. Each trip mirrored the expected duration, with no repeats of the earlier anomaly. The experience left me with more questions than answers. In a world governed by schedules and routines, this singular deviation stood out, challenging my perceptions of time and reality. While the extra $3 earned from arriving early was a small, tangible benefit, the intangible unease it left behind was far more profound. In the end, I resigned myself to the mystery, accepting that some occurrences defy explanation. Life, with its myriad complexities, occasionally presents us with puzzles that remain unsolved, reminding us of the limits of our understanding. It was one of those nights where everything seemed ordinary. The kind of night where you don't expect anything out of the ordinary to happen, but somehow, everything ends up a bit strange. I was about 8 years old, and my room was nothing fancy, just a simple bed with a thick quilt that covered me like a cocoon. I had my favorite stuffed animal by my side, the one that always made me feel safe. My cat, a plump orange tabby, usually slept at the foot of my bed. She was lazy, as cats tend to be, and I loved the warm comfort of knowing she was there. I didn't know what time it was when I woke up that night. The room was dark, with the only light coming from the street lamp outside filtering in through the curtains. Everything in the room was quiet, like it always was, except for the low hum of the house settling into the night. At first, I didn't think much of it. I just opened my eyes and blinked a few times, adjusting to the darkness. But something felt different. I couldn't place it. Maybe it was just the stillness, or maybe the air felt a little heavier than usual. Then I noticed my cat. She was staring at the foot of my bed, her wide yellow eyes locked on something beyond the edge of the mattress. Her body was still, her tail curled neatly around her paws, but her gaze was intense. I remember thinking it was odd because usually she would fall asleep right away after she settled in. But this time, she was just staring. I followed her gaze, but I saw nothing. The space was empty, just the shadowy corner of my room. I didn't feel scared at first. I didn't feel anything, really. I just found it strange and a little unsettling. But that's when I heard the voice. It was a soft, woman's voice, calm and friendly, coming from just beyond the foot of my bed, exactly where my cat was looking. The voice said, "Good morning. How are you?" The words hung in the air, clear and crisp, like someone had just spoken them right into the room. But no one was there. No shadow, no figure, no sign of anything unusual at all. I didn't scream or panic. I didn't even get up and run out of the room. I just lay there, staring at the empty space beyond my bed, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, I thought. Maybe I was dreaming. But no, I was wide awake, and the voice had been too real, too clear to ignore. My cat still didn't move. She kept staring ahead, unblinking, as if she hadn't heard anything out of the ordinary. After a few moments of just lying there, I decided I'd had enough of whatever was happening. I wasn't scared, but I also didn't want to stay in my bed, not knowing what was going on. So without making a sound, I slowly pushed the covers off and swung my legs out from under them. My feet hit the cold floor, but I didn't hesitate. I got up, walked out of my room, and quietly made my way to the living room. It was odd how calm I felt about the whole situation. It wasn't like I was running away from something or even feeling anxious. It was more like I had simply decided that staying in my room was not the right option. So, I settled down on the couch, pulling a blanket over me. The couch wasn't nearly as comfortable as my bed, but it felt like the right place to be at that moment. For a while, I just lay there, trying to make sense of what had happened. I could still feel the weight of the silence in the house, but the room felt different now, somehow. And that's when I sensed it. A presence. I wasn't sure how to explain it, but I could tell that something was near my feet sitting down. It wasn't like I heard anyone sit, or even felt the air shift. But I knew someone or something was there. It wasn't a scary feeling, though. It was like when you're at a family gathering, and someone sits next to you, but you don't have to look up to know who it is. It was just there. That quiet, invisible presence. I don't know how long I lay there, but after a moment, I heard another voice. This time, it was a man's voice, deep and friendly, almost too calm. "Hello. Good day, isn't it?" he said, just like the woman's voice before him. But this time, I didn't hear it from the foot of the bed. I heard it from near my feet, right where I sensed that invisible presence. I didn't respond, of course. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling in the dark, unable to move. I can't even say if I was scared. It didn't feel like fear, not exactly. But it felt strange, unnatural, like I wasn't supposed to be experiencing this. It was so out of place, so detached from anything normal, that it almost seemed as if it didn't belong in the world at all. Then suddenly, everything went dark. The next thing I knew, I was waking up on the couch, the blanket still around me. The sun was just starting to rise, and the house was quiet, just like it always was in the morning. I could hear the faint sound of birds outside, the soft creak of the floorboards as my parents moved around the house. It was like nothing had happened. I didn't tell anyone about it at first. I don't know why I didn't. Maybe I thought it wasn't important. Maybe I just didn't want to seem strange or make anyone worry. It was a weird experience, but it wasn't something that seemed like it needed to be shared. I didn't talk about it for a long time. But over the years, I started to wonder if it had been a dream or just my mind playing tricks on me. I mean, what else could it have been? Now, when I think back on it, I don't know what to make of it. The voice, the feeling of someone sitting at my feet, the strange sense that I was not alone even though I couldn't see anyone. It was all too real to dismiss, but too odd to explain. It was like a dream, but it wasn't. I was awake. I knew I was awake. It never happened again, not like that, not in that exact way. I'd sometimes feel strange things happening in the quiet of the night, but never quite like before. I don't have any answers. I don't know what I experienced that night. I don't know if I'll ever understand it. But it's something that stays with me, even now. Over the years, I've told a few friends and family about it. Some of them laugh it off, think it was just my imagination running wild, maybe from a bad dream or some sort of sleep paralysis. Others, though, seem more intrigued, wondering if there was something to it. But for the most part, it remains a mystery. I never found out who those voices belonged to or why they spoke to me that night. All I know is that it happened. And for some reason, even now, it's something I can't quite shake. People are probably going to think this is bullshit. It's not. On my mother's grave, it is all true. I've carried this with me for almost 20 years now, and I rarely speak of it. It's not because I'm afraid of being called a liar, although I know most people won't believe it, but because remembering it feels like inviting it back. Like if I think about it too much or give it too much air, it might come back around. But I guess some things need to be said. So here goes. When I was a kid, I was a mess. I mean a real mess. I wasn't born into a bad situation, not exactly. I had a mom who loved me, a decent enough house, a school to go to. But something in me always veered toward chaos. I found trouble like it was magnetic. By the time I was 12, I was stealing cigarettes and sneaking out of the house at night. By 14, I was doing pills, and at 15 I was skipping school for weeks at a time and selling weed to older guys just to have money to buy my own stuff. My grades were non-existent. I got expelled from school at 16 for starting a fight with a teacher. I had been arrested twice by then, once for shoplifting and once for possession. When I turned 17, the court system pretty much told me, "Look, we're done trying to help you." They gave me one last shot before they were going to lock me up in a juvenile facility. That shot was Teen Challenge. Teen Challenge was a Christian rehabilitation program that my social worker said was faith-based, and discipline-centered. What that actually meant was it was a hardcore Pentecostal, born-again Christian rehab place where you lived on-site, went through strict routines, and basically gave your whole life to God, or else. You didn't get to leave. You didn't get to talk to your old friends. No internet, no phones, no music that wasn't Christian. It was a minimum 1-year commitment. You earned levels, like in a video game, only instead of getting better armor or more abilities, you got things like permission to call your mom once a week or go on a supervised group hike. At first, I hated it. I hated the way they woke us up at 5:30 in the morning for devotions. I hated the way the staff treated you like you were always guilty. I hated the fake smile encouragement from the counselors. But over time, something started to shift. Not some magical conversion story. No, I didn't fall to my knees and see a vision. It was more like I was exhausted, just so tired of being angry all the time. So I stopped fighting the current and went along with it. I read the Bible when they told me to. I sang the songs during chapel. I prayed even though it felt like shouting into a void. By the time I hit my 6-month mark, I was one of the better behaved guys in the program. They even gave me kitchen duty, which meant I got to eat before everyone else and didn't have to scrub toilets. That felt like winning. Anyway, around the 6-month point, there was something called Spiritual Emphasis Week. I hadn't heard about it until the week before. All I knew was that some guest preacher came in, and instead of the regular 1-hour chapels we had every other day, we were going to have 6-hour-long services all week. I wasn't thrilled. Nobody really was. 6 hours sitting on a folding chair listening to somebody scream about hell and repentance? No thanks. But I showed up anyway. We all had to. Attendance was mandatory, and if you tried to ditch, they'd slap you with what they called disciplinary fasting, which was just a nice way of saying they'd take your food away for a day. The speaker was a man from North Carolina. I don't remember his name. Nobody really talked about it, even back then. But I remember him. I remember the moment he walked into the chapel that first day. He was massive, tall, broad, and thick all the way through. He looked like a guy who'd done manual labor his whole life. His head was shaved clean, and his eyes were small and set back deep into his face. But it was the way he moved that really stuck with me. He walked like someone who was just barely containing something, like he was going to explode if he didn't keep himself in check. He didn't start with any introduction. No opening jokes or pleasantries. He just started yelling. Not angry yelling, exactly, but more like he was fighting something invisible. That's the only way I can describe it. He screamed verses from the Bible at the top of his lungs. He'd say, "I hate the devil," and then stomp his foot so hard the stage shook. He'd scream, "Jesus said," and then launch into some obscure verse from one of the Gospels. And people around me started reacting. At first, it was just little things. Shaking, trembling, crying. That was normal. People cried a lot in chapel. But then it got different. One guy next to me began to breathe really fast, like hyperventilating. Then he started shaking violently. I thought he was having a seizure. The staff didn't seem surprised. They rushed over and started praying loudly in tongues over him. Another girl across the aisle started screaming, but not in her own voice. I swear to God, it was a voice that sounded like it was being forced through a pipe. Guttural, low, almost animalistic. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and she started thrashing in her seat. The preacher never broke stride. He walked over to the first guy, laid his massive hand on the kid's forehead, and shouted, "Get out! You're not welcome here." The guy collapsed backward onto the floor, like someone had unplugged him. He started sobbing. That's when the cold started. It was warm outside. Summer. No AC in the chapel. We were all sweating when we walked in. But as he moved through the room, the temperature dropped. I don't mean it felt colder emotionally. I mean the air literally got cold. Like I could see my breath for a second. And then the smell hit, sour, like spoiled milk and rotting meat. It came and went in bursts, like it was attached to something moving around the room. There was nothing there, but you could feel something brush against your arm or move the hair on your neck. You know how you can tell when someone is standing behind you? That's sixth sense. That was happening constantly, in every direction, but nobody was there. This went on for hours. People started falling out of their seats, screaming, crying, speaking in tongues, or that horrible distorted voice. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I just sat there with my hands clamped on the sides of the chair, staring straight ahead, trying not to breathe too loudly, trying not to attract any attention. At some point, I realized my legs were shaking. My whole body felt like it was buzzing. There was sweat dripping down the sides of my face, but my arms were cold and my hands were numb. I don't even remember how the service ended. I just remember the staff ushering us out in silence. No one said a word, not even the preacher. We walked single file back to our dorms, and everyone looked like they'd just come out of a war zone. And that was just the first day. It went on like that for a week. Every day, 6 hours. Sometimes more. It became normal to hear people scream in voices that didn't belong to them. To see kids convulsing in their seats, or staring dead ahead with blank eyes while the staff prayed over them. People would fall to the floor and twitch or sob for hours. Some would laugh hysterically. Others would vomit. One day, I swear, I saw a girl levitating. Her feet were surrounded by people, so I couldn't see them clearly, but her head was at least 2 feet higher than it should have been. She was arched backward, arms out, eyes shut. People told me she was floating. I don't know if that's true. I didn't want to believe it. Still don't. And always, that preacher kept going, shouting and stomping, barking verses and curses. "I command you to die, devil," he'd scream, and someone would shriek like they'd been burned. The cold and the smells followed him wherever he went. Sometimes it felt like something invisible brushed your face or shoulder, and your skin would crawl like ants were walking across it. It didn't feel like acting. That's the part that still gets me. I wanted so badly to believe it was all a show, that it was theatrics, a trick, but the people it was happening to weren't actors. They were the same people I lived with every day. People I cleaned bathrooms with, ate with, prayed with. People who weren't allowed to make phone calls without permission. There was no way they could have coordinated it. I tried not to think about it afterward. That kind of thing doesn't leave you easily, but I shoved it down and didn't let myself talk about it. I graduated from the program, got my GED, got a job, got clean, built a life. I don't go to church anymore. Haven't in years. But that week never left me. Every once in a while, when I wake up in the middle of the night and the room is too quiet, I think about it. I think about how cold it got. I think about that sour smell. I think about the way people screamed in voices that didn't belong to them. And I wonder what it was, if anything ever really left them, or if we just convinced ourselves it did. I never saw that preacher again. Nobody ever talked about him after that week. It was like the staff wanted to erase it. And maybe they did. Maybe they told themselves it was a miracle. Maybe they believed they'd witnessed some holy war and came out victorious. But for me, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like we'd opened something we didn't understand and couldn't close again. Now I live quietly. I have a job in maintenance, a little apartment. I keep to myself. I don't do drugs anymore. I don't steal. I've stayed out of trouble, but I still feel it sometimes, that cold, that air pressure drop, that weird silence right before a sound you can't explain. I don't talk about it because I don't want people to think I'm crazy, but I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that if I ever see that preacher again, I'm walking the other way. I don't care what he says. I don't care what he promises. I've seen too much to believe that whatever he brought into that room was entirely holy. So yeah, that's what happened. Believe me or don't. I've told you everything. And now I'm going to go back to not thinking about it again, like I have for 20 years. Because whatever it was, it still feels close. When I was 18 years old, I was in the process of trying to get a job at Walmart. I had applied a few times and finally got a call back to come in for an interview, but there was one small problem. I had to pass a drug test. Now back then, I was a regular smoker. I would light up daily, and if I wasn't smoking, I was thinking about it. It wasn't just a casual thing either. I'd been into weed for years at that point. So, when I got the call about the drug test, I knew I was in trouble. I had about a week until the test, so I started scrambling for a solution. I'd heard stories of these detox drinks that could supposedly help flush your system in time for a drug test, but I wasn't exactly sure if they worked. I had a friend who had used them before, and he swore by it, so I figured I'd give it a shot. There was only one problem. The closest store that sold these cleansing drinks was about 2.5 hours away, in the next state over. I had to make a trip. And let's just say I didn't mind much because, well, I loved an excuse to take a road trip, especially when it meant a few hours of getting high with my friend and checking out cool glass pipes and bongs. I woke up that morning with a pit in my stomach. I knew I had to get to this head shop and get the drink, but I wasn't thrilled about the drive. It was a Tuesday, so traffic wouldn't be terrible, but it still felt like a long way to go for one stupid drink. I figured I'd meet my buddy at his place, and we could make a day of it. We'd grab the drink, look at some glass, and smoke some weed along the way. Simple. The drive to meet my friend was only about 20 minutes from my house, but as I was pulling out of my street, I noticed something strange. There was a car parked right across from my house, a plain, nondescript sedan. It was just sitting there, idling, with a man in the driver's seat. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't on the phone or looking at anything in particular. He was just sitting there, looking straight ahead. I wouldn't have thought much of it if it hadn't been for the fact that it was so early in the morning. There weren't a lot of people out that time of day. I thought maybe he was waiting for someone, or maybe he was lost. But something about it just didn't sit right with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me. I glanced at him as I drove past, and our eyes met for just a second before I turned the corner. I remember my heart rate picking up just a little, but I quickly brushed it off. It was probably nothing. Maybe just someone passing through the neighborhood. I met my friend at his place, and we headed out. We got in the car, blasted some music, and started the long drive to the next state over. The whole way there, we were talking about random stuff, laughing, and getting high. I remember hitting a few bowls, laughing at dumb jokes, and passing the time while the road stretched out in front of us. It was a typical road trip for us, except for the fact that the whole time, I couldn't stop thinking about that damn car. Every time we passed through a town or a stretch of open road, I kept expecting to see that sedan again, just lurking on the side of the road somewhere. But I didn't see it. I didn't see the guy either. It was like he had disappeared. So, as the trip went on, I started to relax a little. We made it to the head shop, and I went inside to grab the detox drink. While I was there, my friend and I looked at some glass pipes and bongs, as we always did when we came to this particular shop. It was a small, dusty place, but it had the best selection of glass in the area. We spent probably an hour there, just looking around and chatting with the guy behind the counter. We didn't rush. We were high, and we didn't have a care in the world. After we got what we needed, we grabbed some snacks and started heading back. The drive back felt a little longer for some reason. I was still feeling the high, and my friend kept playing stupid games on his phone. But something about the drive back had me feeling a little more paranoid than I usually did. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that same sedan following us. But nothing. We got to the point where we were about 30 minutes from crossing back into my home state, and I remember looking in my rearview mirror again. That's when I saw it. The same car. The same damn sedan. It was right behind us. At first, I thought maybe it was just a coincidence, that it was some random guy on a similar route or something. But when I looked closer, I saw the same guy sitting in the driver's seat. The same expressionless look on his face, staring straight ahead. It didn't make sense. I was already in my home state, and we had been on back roads the entire trip. There was no way this guy could have ended up on the same route as us, not unless he was following us. My heart dropped. I didn't say anything to my friend right away. I didn't want to sound paranoid or make a big deal out of nothing, but I could feel my anxiety creeping up, and I started second-guessing everything. The way he was just sitting there, unmoving, with no obvious reason to be on the road at that time, it was unnerving. I tried to shake it off. We were still a good distance away from my house, and I didn't want to make a scene or freak my friend out. I tried to keep calm, but as the car followed us down the road, I started to panic. We were on a stretch of highway with few cars around, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to take a different route, back country roads, ones I knew well. That way, if this guy was following us, I could at least throw him off the trail. We veered off the main road and onto a more secluded back road. The sedan followed us, staying at a distance but still staying right behind us. I started to speed up a little, hoping to lose him, but no matter what I did, the car stayed right there. I could barely see it in the mirror now, but I knew it was still there. We drove like this for a good 20 minutes. I kept checking the rearview mirror, and every time I did, I saw the sedan. It wasn't just a random car passing by. It was following us, plain and simple. At this point, I felt like I was in a movie, the kind where the main character realizes they're being followed by someone who doesn't belong. Finally, I took another turn onto a smaller dirt road, and when I looked in the mirror again, the sedan was gone. For a second, I felt a huge relief. I thought maybe I had lost him for good. We were now on the last stretch of road before I would be home, and I was beginning to calm down a little. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just some coincidence, some guy on his way to wherever, but I still couldn't shake the feeling. When I pulled into my driveway, I checked the street one last time. There was nothing. The street was quiet, just like it always was. I told my friend about the car, and he was skeptical, brushing it off as nothing. Maybe I had just been overthinking things. Maybe it was all just coincidence. But I knew what I saw. I knew what happened. And I was sure it was the same man in the same sedan. The rest of the day passed without incident. I went inside, took the cleansing drink as directed, and an hour later, I was headed to my drug test. To my surprise, I passed the test with no issues. That detox drink worked. I walked out of there feeling like I'd just escaped something. A week later, I started the job at Walmart. I never saw that man or that car again. I thought about it a lot, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe I was just paranoid. But I still wonder to this day if that man was following me for a reason. Was he an undercover cop? Did he know something I didn't? I guess I'll never know. But one thing's for sure. When I think back on that strange day, I still get a cold chill down my spine. I had always been drawn to the art of photography, especially the challenge of capturing emotion through the lens. One particular assignment for my college photography class required us to explore themes of sorrow and remembrance. After some deliberation, I decided that a graveyard would provide the perfect backdrop for such evocative imagery. I shared my idea with my friends, and they agreed to help by modeling for the shoot. On a cool, overcast afternoon, we gathered at the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. The sky was a uniform gray, casting a somber tone over the landscape. Rows upon rows of weathered tombstones stretched out before us, each bearing silent testimony to lives once lived. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the only sounds were the distant cawing of crows and the rustling of the wind through the trees. We wandered through the graveyard, searching for suitable locations. I was particularly drawn to an area where the tombstones were older and more ornate, their inscriptions worn by time. The atmosphere was heavy, almost oppressive, but it suited the mood I aimed to capture. I positioned my friend, whom I'll call Sarah, near an elaborate family plot enclosed by a wrought iron fence. The headstones were tall and imposing, with intricate carvings and epitaphs that spoke of love and loss. I asked Sarah to pose as though she were mourning, to convey a deep sense of grief. She nodded, took a deep breath, and turned toward the graves. As I adjusted the settings on my camera, I noticed Sarah's shoulders beginning to tremble. At first, I was impressed by her commitment to the role, believing she had tapped into some deep well of emotion. I framed the shot and began capturing the scene, the shutter clicking rhythmically. It wasn't until I lowered the camera to review the shots that I realized something was amiss. Sarah was not merely pretending. She was genuinely sobbing, her body shaking with the force of her cries. Concerned, I approached her and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, are you okay?" I asked softly. She didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on the headstones before her. Following her line of sight, I read the names etched into the marble. My breath caught in my throat as I processed what I was seeing. The names on the tombstones were identical to those of Sarah's family members: her father, mother, sister, and brother. Each name, down to the middle initials, matched perfectly. The dates of death were from decades ago, long before Sarah or her siblings were born. Yet, the coincidence was uncanny, almost impossible to comprehend. "My family, they're alive," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "They live in another state. This doesn't make sense." I had no words to offer. The odds of such a coincidence seemed astronomical. The rest of our friends gathered around, their faces reflecting a mix of confusion and concern. We stood in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on us. After what felt like an eternity, Sarah wiped her tears and took a shaky breath. "Maybe it's just a bizarre coincidence," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. We decided to wrap up the shoot early. The mood had shifted, and none of us felt comfortable continuing. As we packed up our equipment, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that had settled over me. We walked back to my car in silence, each lost in our thoughts. Once inside, I hoped that some music might lighten the atmosphere. One of our friends had brought a USB drive loaded with songs, so we plugged it into the car's audio system. Familiar melodies filled the space, providing a semblance of normalcy. As we drove away from the cemetery, a particular song played for the third time. Just as we began to relax, the music abruptly cut out. In its place, a deep, guttural voice emanated from the speakers, chilling us to the bone. "Get back from where you came from," it growled, the words distorted and menacing. We sat in stunned silence as the song resumed exactly where it had left off, as if nothing had happened. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles turning white. A glance in the rearview mirror showed my friends' faces, pale and wide-eyed. "What the hell was that?" one of them finally managed to say. I don't know," I admitted, my voice unsteady. The remainder of the drive was tense, each of us grappling with the inexplicable events. When we finally reached our destination, we sat in the car for a moment, unwilling to break the silence. Over the following days, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The rational part of my mind searched for explanations. Perhaps the names on the tombstones were a bizarre coincidence, a fluke that defied probability. But the voice on the radio, that was harder to dismiss. I began researching potential causes of such interference. I learned that car radios can sometimes pick up stray signals due to various factors. Electrical components within the vehicle, such as the ignition system or alternator, can produce electromagnetic interference. Poor grounding or faulty wiring can exacerbate the issue, allowing unwanted signals to infiltrate the audio system. Additionally, external sources like nearby radio transmitters or power lines can cause sudden disruptions. In some cases, devices plugged into the car's power outlets, like phone chargers or dash cams, can introduce noise into the system. Even the USB drive we used could have been a factor. If it was malfunctioning or poorly shielded, it might have caused the audio glitch. Despite these plausible explanations, the specific nature of the message we heard, "Get back from where you came from," was deeply unsettling. It seemed too coherent, too intentional, to be mere interference. In the end, I was left with more questions than answers. While technical factors might account for the radio disturbance, they couldn't explain the profound sense of unease that lingered. The experience left an indelible mark on me, a reminder that some events defy explanation, lingering on the fringes of understanding. To this day, I approach such coincidences with a mix of curiosity and caution, ever aware of the thin veil that separates the known from the unknown. Last year, around the end of October, I found myself at this little dive bar on the outskirts of town. It wasn't the kind of place I normally went to, but I'd been talking to this girl online for a few weeks, and she suggested it. Said she liked low-key spots that didn't try too hard. The kind of place where the lighting's dim, the beer's cheap, and the booths are worn from years of elbows and spilled drinks. I figured it'd be a good way to just sit and talk without the usual crowd of people trying to show off or act bigger than they are. I didn't know the area that well, so I showed up about half an hour early just to make sure I found it on time. I parked a block away since the tiny lot was already full, and the streets around that part of town were narrow and uneven. Cracks ran through the pavement like veins, and there was a faint smell of old oil and wet leaves hanging in the air. I remember tugging my jacket a little tighter as I walked up. The bar looked like it had been there since the 70s, maybe even earlier. The wood siding on the outside had gone gray in places. The neon beer signs in the windows flickered like they couldn't decide whether to stay lit or give up. The front door was heavy, and when I stepped inside, it creaked just enough to make a few people turn and look. Nothing hostile, just that usual look you give someone walking into a small place where everyone already knows each other. It was warm in there, the kind of thick, cozy warmth that sinks into your clothes and skin, smells like fryer grease, spilled whiskey, and old wood. There were about a dozen people scattered around, some at the bar, others tucked into booths. The music playing was low and sounded like an old classic rock playlist on shuffle. I found a booth in the corner that gave me a good view of the whole place and sat with my back to the wall. With nothing else to do, I people watched. Not in a creepy way, just something I've always done. It's kind of a habit. I like watching how people move, how they talk with their hands, how they look when they think no one's paying attention. After maybe 10 minutes, 2 girls caught my eye near the bar. They looked like they'd been drinking for a while. Loud, laughing the way drunk girls do when they're too far gone to care who hears them. The blonde one had smeared mascara, and the brunette had that kind of unsteady sway where you keep readjusting your seat without realizing it. They weren't young, maybe late 20s, early 30s, dressed like they were going out somewhere better, but ended up here instead. Tight jeans, heels a little too high for comfort, makeup that had started out perfect, but was starting to slide a bit with the heat and alcohol. They were talking about guys, loudly. Which ones they'd slept with recently, which ones were boring, which ones were just for fun. Real classy stuff. Every other word was either a giggle or some kind of wild story. A couple guys at the bar clearly enjoyed the show, throwing glances and smirks their way. I didn't stare, but I watched in that half-interested way you do when there's not much else to look at. They were attractive, even hammered. The kind of messy, pretty chaos that's only fun to watch from a distance. I checked my phone a few times, sipped a beer slowly, and kept an eye on the door. My date finally showed up about 20 minutes late, which I didn't mind. She had one of those easy smiles, the kind that made me forget how awkward first dates usually are. We found a table not far from the bar, a little closer to the girls than I would have picked, but it was one of the only open ones. She sat across from me, and we started talking. Conversation flowed easier than I expected. We talked about work, favorite shows, dumb high school stories. Nothing too deep, just that kind of surface-level stuff you use to test the waters. Every so often, one of the girls at the bar would laugh too loud, or drop something, or try to call the bartender in that exaggerated way drunk people do. We'd both glance over, and then go back to talking. I think it had been about 45 minutes. I was mid-sentence, telling some story about a weird coworker, when I just happened to glance over again at the girls. And that's when it happened. The brunette, easily the drunker of the two, suddenly stopped moving. Just froze. Her spine went rigid, her shoulders locked, and then like someone cut her strings, she fell straight backward off the bar stool. No reaction, no trying to catch herself. Just timbered over like a tree, arms still at her sides. Her head smacked the floor with a sickening crack. Not like a bump or a thud, this was loud. Sharp, final, the kind of sound that turns heads in an instant. A second passed, maybe two, where everyone around just stared. Then someone gasped. Her friend screamed. Blood started pooling almost immediately around the back of her head. It was dark, thick, and moved too fast. I stood up before I even knew what I was doing. Training kicked in. I manage a crew in a union job, construction, and we're required to take emergency first aid courses every year. Most people forget half of it, but I always took it seriously. Too many accidents happen on the job not to. My body moved faster than my brain could keep up. I pushed through the small crowd that was already forming, crouched next to her, careful not to touch the blood. Her eyes had rolled back, just the whites visible, and her whole body started shaking violently. Full-on seizure. I remembered what the training said. Don't try to hold them down. Clear the area so they don't hurt themselves more. Stay calm. I shouted for someone to call 911, even though someone probably already had. Her friend was sobbing, clutching her purse like it would help. People were crowding in too close, panicking. I told them to step back. One guy tried to take a video, and I snapped at him hard enough that he backed off without a word. I gently turned her on her side, just enough to keep her airway clear, bracing her head as best I could. Blood kept leaking out, soaking into the floor, mixing with the grime and old beer spills. The shaking lasted maybe a minute, maybe more. Time got weird. Felt like forever. Eventually, her body went still, her breathing shallow and wheezy. I checked her pulse, still there, weak but steady. People were murmuring behind me. The bartender came around with towels, asked if he could help, but I told him just to keep people back. The EMTs showed up after what felt like 20 minutes. They moved fast. Asked me what happened, what I'd done. Took over. I stepped back, hands shaking, and realized how much blood had splattered on my jeans and boots. One of them, a younger guy with a shaved head and steady voice, told me I'd done good. Said I probably saved her life. They got her on a stretcher and wheeled her out fast. And just like that, she was gone. The bar was quiet for a long time after that. People tried to go back to normal, drinks clinking, low conversation, but it wasn't the same. My date was still sitting at our table when I got back, eyes wide, not really sure what to say. I sat down, still catching my breath, and we just kind of stared at each other for a while. I expected her to want to leave right away, but she didn't. She stayed. She actually looked kind of impressed. I didn't feel like a hero, though. Just felt shaken. We stayed another hour, talking again once the adrenaline wore off. I couldn't stop replaying the sound of her skull hitting the floor. That hollow, brutal noise. I didn't know who she was. Didn't know if she made it. There was no way to follow up. The bar staff didn't know her personally. She was just someone who came in from time to time. All I could do was hope. When we finally left, I walked my date to her car. The cold air hit hard after the warmth of the bar. She gave me a hug, thanked me for the night, said she'd text me. She did. We ended up seeing each other a few more times after that. Something about going through a moment like that kind of binds people together for a while. But what stayed with me most wasn't the date. It wasn't even the girl, or the ambulance, or the blood. It was how fast it all happened. 1 second she was laughing, drunk and alive, and the next she was on the ground with her life leaking out of her head. No warning, no build-up, just snap. The randomness of it still shakes me up sometimes. I kept thinking about how easily that could have been anyone. We all like to think there's a rhythm to life, a kind of cause and effect that makes sense, but that night blew that idea apart. It didn't matter that she was young, healthy looking, just out having fun. Your brain doesn't care how drunk you are or how good your night's going. When it decides to misfire, it just does. I haven't been back to that bar since. I think it's still there. Probably still smells the same, still plays the same music. But every time I drive past that street, I remember the way her body stiffened, the way her head bounced on the wood floor, the way people froze, not knowing what to do. The moment when everything changed without warning. I never found out what happened to her. Maybe she recovered. Maybe she didn't. But I did what I could. I gave her a chance. And sometimes, that's all you can do. I don't think I've ever been so aware of the silence in a room as I was that night. It was the end of the summer before I was about to leave for college, just days after my high school graduation. I was 17 at the time, on the cusp of a new chapter in my life. My sister was home for the summer, which meant we shared a room. We'd always been close growing up, so it wasn't unusual for us to stay up late talking. This night was no different, just the two of us, lying in our beds and chatting about whatever crossed our minds. The room was lit by the dim glow of a bedside lamp, the kind of soft light that made everything feel cozy. I could hear the distant hum of the air conditioner running in the background, barely enough to keep the room from feeling stuffy. The beds were parallel to each other, just far enough apart that we had our own space, but close enough that it felt like we were still in each other's presence, even if we weren't talking. We had been talking for nearly 2 hours, laughing at old inside jokes and reflecting on the past summer. But as we both began to get tired, the conversation started to dwindle, leaving us in silence. I remember how comfortable it felt, the kind of silence that you only share with someone you're completely at ease with. I could feel my body sinking into the mattress, my eyes growing heavy as the minutes ticked by. For a moment, I thought I might fall asleep. But then, just as I was starting to drift off, something happened. Something I can't fully explain, even now. It was so sudden. One moment, I was lying flat on my back, staring up at the ceiling, and the next, I was no longer on my bed. I was lifted. No, it was more like I was yanked out of my bed and suspended in the air. It didn't feel like I was floating, but like I was being held there by an invisible force. My body was completely stiff, my muscles locked in place, unable to move. I couldn't even speak. The feeling was terrifying, almost like being caught in a vice grip, and all I could do was struggle against it. I felt this intense shaking, violent tremors that rattled through me, as though I was being jerked around by 2 strong hands, gripping me by the shoulders and pulling me up. I could feel the weight of the mattress beneath me, but I wasn't touching it anymore. No, I was in the air, hovering, shaking uncontrollably. I tried to scream, but my mouth went numb. It was like my entire face had gone cold and heavy, and no sound would come out. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. The only thing I could do was try to shake off whatever this was, try to regain control of my body. But I couldn't. All I could do was feel the shaking, the force of whatever had lifted me off my bed, thrashing me around like I was nothing more than a rag doll. It lasted only a few seconds, though it felt like much longer. But suddenly it stopped. I wasn't floating anymore. I wasn't shaking. I dropped back down onto my bed with a heavy thud, my body slamming back into the mattress, as if the invisible force had released me all at once. I lay there, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest like it was going to burst out. It was over just like that. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't know how to explain it. My body felt like it had been drained of all its energy, but at the same time, there was this strange calmness that washed over me. I wasn't hurt, physically at least, but my face felt different. It was as though it had been stretched out, as though every muscle in my face had been pulled and strained. It was sore, like I'd been smiling for too long or holding a grimace without realizing it. And there was this heaviness in my chest, a sort of exhaustion that wasn't from running or exertion, but from something else entirely. I couldn't make sense of it. I sat up immediately, my breath still unsteady, trying to shake off the feeling. My sister, who had been lying on her bed in silence, suddenly spoke up, her voice shaking but calm. Did you just see that?" she asked, her words barely more than a whisper. I turned to look at her. Her wide eyes were locked onto me, and I could see the fear written all over her face. It took me a moment to find my voice, but when I did, I could barely form the words. "Yeah, I don't know what happened," I replied, my voice hoarse and weak. The room felt heavy in the aftermath, as though the very air had thickened around us. It was like everything had paused, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The silence that followed was deafening. We just sat there, both of us wide-eyed, not knowing what to say. I looked at my sister, and she looked at me, but neither of us could offer any kind of explanation. "I saw it too," she said after a long pause, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw you. You were just lifted up, like you were floating." I nodded, not sure what else to say. There was nothing else to say. What was there to explain? There were no words that could capture the strangeness of what had just happened. We both just sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what had just occurred, trying to make sense of it. But it didn't make sense. It didn't fit into anything I knew or understood. It was like the rules of reality had been bent, twisted in a way that I couldn't grasp. The air in the room felt thick, charged with something I couldn't name, something that made me feel like I was waiting for the next thing to happen. But nothing did. The silence stretched on, growing longer, more suffocating. I looked down at my hands, my fingers trembling slightly as I tried to steady myself. I felt drained, like I had just run a marathon without ever moving. My sister, still sitting on her bed, finally spoke again, her voice soft but full of concern. "Are you all right?" I nodded, but the effort it took to move my head felt like too much. My body felt exhausted, my mind foggy, like I had just woken from a deep sleep. "Yeah," I said, my voice more like a croak than anything else. "I'm okay. I don't know what that was." It took everything I had to sit up, to force my body to stay upright. My head felt heavy, and my limbs felt like lead. I couldn't shake the feeling of being off balance, like the world around me was tilted just enough that I couldn't find my footing. I reached up and touched my face, feeling the tension in my muscles, the soreness that seemed to stretch all the way from my jaw to my forehead. But still, I wasn't hurt. I wasn't physically injured in any way. And yet, something about what had just happened lingered in my mind, something that wouldn't let me go. My sister and I didn't speak much more after that. We just stayed there, staring at the walls, trying to process what had happened. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. As the minutes passed, the feeling of dread began to fade, replaced by a strange sense of calm. I felt like I could breathe again, like the weight of the room had been lifted, even if I couldn't explain what had happened. It was just over. I didn't know why it happened, and I didn't know if it would ever happen again. But I did know one thing. Nothing felt the same after that. It was like a line had been crossed, something had changed, and we couldn't go back to the way things were before. Eventually, I laid back down, trying to shake off the exhaustion that had settled in my body. My sister did the same, though I could tell she was still shaken by what she had seen. We didn't talk anymore that night. Neither of us could. There were no words that could explain it, no comfort to be found. We just lay there in the dark, listening to the silence, feeling like we were waiting for something that would never come. The next day, it was as though nothing had happened. There were no lingering effects, no aftershocks of whatever that was. But every time I closed my eyes, I couldn't help but remember that moment, that feeling of being pulled out of my bed, suspended in the air like a puppet. It stayed with me, deep in my chest, like a quiet fear I couldn't name. I never figured it out. I never found an explanation for it. It just happened, and that was that. And sometimes, when I lie in bed at night, I can still feel it, just a tiny flicker of that strange sensation. But I don't talk about it anymore, because some things are better left unsaid. I grew up in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. If you know the area, you already understand. It's not a place where you grow up playing tag on tree-lined streets or riding your bike in the neighborhood without looking over your shoulder. It's loud, raw, dirty, crowded. You learn fast. If you don't, the world teaches you even faster. There were things that scared me all the time: shouting in the alleys, the way people looked at you on the sidewalk, the feeling that someone always knew a little too much about where you lived, when you were alone, what time your parents left. I never had much supervision. My parents worked a lot and were barely home, so my grandma looked after me, but she was older and tired. I loved her, but she wasn't really capable of handling what came with raising a little kid in that kind of place. Most of the time, I was just trying to keep myself busy and out of trouble. But at that age, I didn't know what trouble looked like until it was already in front of me. I was 6 years old when the thing that's haunted me the longest happened. I had already learned a lot by that age: how to keep my eyes open, how to run fast, how to stay quiet when things got heated. I learned how to hit and run, literally. I don't even remember when I picked it up, just that it became something I knew how to do. In my school, kids got rough all the time. Pushing, shoving, grabbing your backpack, tripping you in the hallway. None of it felt weird to us. But I remember that day so clearly, even though it's been more than 12 years. I was in the hallway after lunch. Someone shoved me from behind hard enough that I stumbled and nearly fell. I turned around quick and swung my little fist right at the kid behind me. I didn't know who he was, didn't think twice. Just hit him in the face and took off. It was instinct. That's how things went. You didn't let people push you around, and if you did, they'd never stop. The kid I punched cried. I didn't even hit him that hard, but I guess it surprised him more than anything. Teachers came running. He got taken to the office, and a while later, they called me down too. They gave me a detention, and that was that, or so I thought. I remember sitting in the front office waiting for someone to sign me out when a tall guy walked in through the glass doors. I didn't know who he was, maybe 17 or 18, maybe older. He looked like he didn't belong in a school building. He had this shaved head and dark eyes, big coat, hands stuffed in his pockets. He glanced around like he was bored, but when his eyes landed on me, they stayed there. He stared hard. No emotion, just still and cold. I was just a little kid, but I'll never forget that look. It was like a warning, like he already decided something about me. Then he turned away, and I never saw him again after that. I didn't know who he was. I thought maybe he was the kid's cousin or brother. Maybe nothing. Maybe just a coincidence. But something about that stare dug into my head and stuck there. The weekend came, and I mostly forgot about it. I was too young to stay scared of something for long. I played with some toys, watched TV, helped my grandma cook. I stayed inside that Saturday night. My parents were out again. I didn't know where, maybe work, maybe friends. I never really asked. My grandma was watching her shows in the other room. I brushed my teeth and got ready for bed. It was late, maybe around 10 or 10:30. Our apartment was always kind of dark and felt smaller at night. I remember crawling under my blanket and hearing a few sirens outside, which was normal. The streets never really went quiet. I must have dozed off because I remember the moment I woke up. It was this sharp crash, like glass breaking. It was loud and sudden, and I sat straight up in bed. My heart immediately started pounding. I didn't know what it was at first. I thought maybe something fell, or maybe a neighbor had broken something. Then I heard it again. Not glass this time, footsteps. Not quiet ones. Heavy, deliberate steps. Right inside the apartment. I didn't know what to do. I froze. Everything in my body screamed at me to stay put, but curiosity pushed me forward. I slid out of bed slowly and crept toward the hallway. I didn't call for my grandma. I don't know why. I guess I thought maybe she was already up or checking it out. I remember holding my breath, barely moving, my socks silent on the floor. I peeked around the corner toward the kitchen. That's when I saw them. 2 men. Big. One of them had on a dark hoodie. The other had a baseball cap pulled low. They didn't see me right away. They were in our kitchen, rifling through drawers, cabinets, even the fridge. One of them walked over to the counter where my dad kept his toolbox and started taking stuff. I couldn't understand what was happening. They were inside our house, and no one had stopped them. No alarm, no yelling, no nothing. Just them doing whatever they wanted. I felt this cold feeling spread through my chest and arms. Not like being scared at school or hearing someone yell on the street. This was worse. This was real. This was danger. I turned and ran, nearly tripping over myself, straight for the phone in my parents' bedroom. I shut the door behind me as quietly as I could, then dialed the police. My fingers were shaking. I didn't even remember the address at first. I had to look at a piece of paper taped to the wall. I whispered everything I could to the woman on the other end. She told me to stay on the line, but I dropped the phone. I crawled under the bed and just stayed there. I didn't even try to find my grandma. I don't know where she was. Maybe asleep, maybe pretending not to hear anything. I hoped she was okay, but I didn't move. It felt like hours. Every second dragged. I could hear footsteps above me, near the door down the hall. Cabinets slamming. Drawers opening and closing. Something falling over. I kept waiting for the door to open, for one of them to look under the bed. I tried not to breathe too loud. My mouth was dry, and my throat burned, but I didn't make a sound. I had never felt that useless in my life. I wanted to be strong, to fight or scream, but I couldn't. I was 6. I couldn't do anything but hide. The cops came eventually. Sirens, then knocking, then yelling. I stayed under the bed until I heard them call out. Even then, I didn't move until someone opened the bedroom door and called out that it was safe. When I finally crawled out, my legs were numb. There were several officers in the house. One of them knelt and asked me if I was okay. I just nodded. I didn't have any answers for their questions. I didn't know who the guys were, how they got in, or if they took anything. I just knew they were there. One of the windows in the living room had been shattered. They must have climbed through it. There were muddy footprints all over the tile. Things were missing. Tools, a few electronics, even a jacket my dad always wore. The cops tried asking my grandma questions too, but she just kept shaking her head and saying she didn't know anything had happened. After they left, I looked around the apartment. It felt different, like it didn't belong to us anymore. I didn't feel safe there. The walls felt thinner. The locks felt useless. I couldn't stop thinking about how easy it had been for those men to walk in. We never found out who they were. The police said it was probably a random break-in. That stuff happened all the time in the Tenderloin. But I kept thinking about the kid I hit and the look that older guy gave me in the office. I couldn't shake it. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe not. I never saw that kid again. He stopped coming to school. I never asked about him. I didn't want to know. A year later, we moved to another city. Somewhere quieter. Not perfect, but not the Tenderloin. I made new friends. Grew up. But that night stayed with me. It burned itself into the back of my head. For years, I couldn't sleep without checking the windows twice. I didn't trust doors. I didn't trust noises. Even now, 12 years later, I'm a freshman in college, living in a dorm that's probably safer than anywhere I've ever stayed, but I still sleep with a knife under my pillow. I keep another in my jeans pocket, even when I'm inside. It's not that I think it'll protect me. It's that I need something, anything, to make me feel like I'm not just that helpless little kid hiding under a bed again. I don't talk about it much. People think I'm paranoid. Maybe I am. I check the locks twice before I go to bed. I keep my shoes close to my bed in case I need to run. I never wear headphones in both ears. I always pay attention to who's behind me. Even in class, I sit near the exits just in case. Most people think that kind of stuff is overkill, but it's not about being ready for anything. It's about not letting myself forget. That night taught me how fast your world can fall apart. How quickly people can step into your life, take what they want, and leave you wondering if any of it was even real. I've tried to let it go. I really have. I've gone to therapy sessions, tried breathing exercises, journaling, all of that. It helps a little, but nothing takes it away fully. Maybe it never will. Maybe it's one of those things that just becomes part of you, whether you want it to or not. That night changed the way I see everything. It taught me that danger doesn't always look like danger. It can walk right into your kitchen and leave before anyone notices. But I'm still here. I made it through. I'm not that scared little kid anymore. I know more now. I'm stronger. I don't let fear control me, even if it's always with me. I don't freeze anymore. I move. I think. I prepare. I don't expect safety, but I don't let that stop me from living. I go to my classes, I study. I walk through campus like everyone else. I just keep my eyes open. I don't know if I'll ever fully get over what happened. Maybe in time I'll let the knife go, trust the locks, leave the past where it belongs. But until then, I carry what I need to feel okay. I don't see that as weakness anymore. I see it as surviving. And that's enough for now.